The dust hadn't even settled when Emily Parker realized the terrible truth. Her husband wasn't coming back. 6 months pregnant, abandoned at a desolate Arizona stagecoach stop with nothing but empty promises and an emptier carpet bag, she faced a future bleaker than the desert stretching endlessly before her. But fate works in mysterious ways on the frontier. When a weathered cowboy with sad eyes and 2 motherless children offered her an impossible bargain, Emily had to choose pride or survival. Stay until the end to discover how betrayal became her greatest blessing. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story has traveled. The Arizona sun hung merciless in the afternoon sky, turning the wooden planks of the stagecoach stop into a griddle that shimmered with heat. Emily Parker sat perfectly still on the rough-hewn bench outside the station, her hands folded over the swell of her belly, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the road dissolved into wavering mirages. She had been sitting there for 3 hours now, though it felt like a lifetime compressed into a single, endless moment of realization. Her husband wasn't coming back. The knowledge settled over her like a burial shroud, suffocating and final. Thomas Parker, the man who had sworn before God and witnesses to love and cherish her, to provide and protect, had left her here like unwanted baggage, discarded at a way station in the middle of nowhere. Emily's fingers trembled as she reached into her pocket for the note he'd left. Though she'd already read it so many times, the words were burned into her memory. The paper was creased and damp from her tears, the ink slightly smudged where her thumbs had gripped it too tightly. Emily, I can't do this anymore. The baby, the responsibility, the endless struggle, it's not the life I wanted. You'll be better off without me. There's a town 20 miles west. Start over. Forget me. 20 miles west. As if she could simply walk 20 miles in her condition, with no money, no food, and the Arizona desert waiting to swallow her whole. As if she could start over with a child growing inside her and not a penny to her name. Ma'am, you all right there? Emily's head snapped up. The station keeper, a grizzled man named Hoskins with tobacco-stained teeth and suspicious eyes, stood in the doorway wiping his hands on a filthy apron. I'm fine, Emily said automatically, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Hoskins spat into the dust. Your husband said he'd be back before nightfall. It's past 4 now. His tone carried no sympathy, only the practical irritation of a man who'd seen too many hard-luck stories play out at his station. He's been delayed, Emily said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. I'm sure he'll return soon. Another lie. But what else could she say? That her husband had abandoned her? That she had no idea what to do next? That with every passing minute, the terror growing in her chest threatened to consume her completely? Hoskins grunted, clearly unconvinced. Stage comes through tomorrow morning, heading east. If you got fare, you can be on it. If not, he shrugged, the gesture conveying everything he didn't say aloud. If not, she was someone else's problem. How much is the fare? Emily asked, though she already knew the answer would be impossible. $3 to Tucson, $5 to El Paso. $3 might as well have been $300. Emily had exactly 17 cents in her pocket, the change from a loaf of bread Thomas had sent her to buy that morning in the last town. Before he'd convinced her to get off the stage here, claiming they needed to rest and reconsider their plans. Before he'd waited until she'd dozed off in the late morning heat, then slipped away like a thief, taking their bags, their money, everything except the clothes on her back and that damning note. I see, Emily said quietly, turning her face away so Hoskins wouldn't see the fresh tears threatening to fall. Thank you. The station keeper lingered a moment longer, then retreated inside, muttering something about damn fool women and the men who leave 'em. Emily sat motionless, her mind racing through impossible calculations. 17 cents, 6 months pregnant, no family. Her parents had died of fever 2 years ago, and Thomas had been her only living relative by marriage. No friends in this territory. They'd been traveling west from Missouri, chasing Thomas's dream of finding work in the silver mines. The baby kicked, a flutter of movement that made Emily catch her breath. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the life growing within her, innocent, dependent, utterly vulnerable. What kind of world was she bringing this child into? What kind of mother would she be, with no home, no husband, no means of survival. Stop it, she told herself fiercely. Self-pity won't feed you or the baby. Think. There has to be a way. But as she stared out at the unforgiving landscape, all scrub brush and red rocks and endless sky, Emily couldn't imagine what that way might be. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up with sudden, desperate hope. Maybe Thomas had changed his mind. Maybe he'd realized the magnitude of his betrayal and come back to make things right. Maybe, but the rider who emerged from the heat haze wasn't Thomas. This man sat taller in the saddle, broader through the shoulders, and as he drew closer, Emily could see he was leading a pack horse laden with supplies. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent more years on horseback than on foot, his hat pulled low against the sun. He reined in his mount near the water trough, dismounting with a fluid grace that spoke of long practice. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud, and he led his horse to drink, all without so much as glancing in Emily's direction. Emily watched him from beneath her lowered lashes, taking in details without meaning to. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes were worn but clean, the clothes of a working man who took pride in his appearance despite the hard life he led. There was something in the set of his shoulders, a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion, that made Emily think he carried burdens of his own. "Hoskins inside," the man called out, his voice a low rumble that carried easily in the still air. "Yes, sir," Emily answered before she could think better of it. The man's gaze swung to her then, and Emily found herself looking into eyes the color of storm clouds, gray with flecks of blue, sharp with intelligence, and something else she couldn't quite name. Surprise? Concern? His eyes moved from her face to her swollen belly, then to her obvious lack of luggage, and something shifted in his expression. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect that made Emily's throat tighten. When had anyone last shown her such simple courtesy? "Sir," she replied, managing to keep her voice steady. The man studied her for a long moment, and Emily had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed, measured, understood in ways that made her want to squirm. Then he turned and headed into the station, his spurs chinking softly with each step. Through the open door, Emily could hear the murmur of male voices, Hoskins' whiny tenor and the stranger's deeper bass. She couldn't make out words, but she heard the tone shift, becoming more animated. Then silence, followed by heavy footsteps. The stranger emerged from the station, Hoskins trailing behind him like a gossiping hen. The cowboy's expression had changed. His jaw was set, his eyes hard with something that looked like anger, though not directed at her. He approached Emily directly this time, stopping a respectful distance away. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the weathering of sun and wind and hard years written across his face. But there was kindness there too, buried deep beneath the calluses life had built. "Ma'am, forgive my forwardness, but Hoskins tells me you've been waiting here since midday for a husband who's not coming back." Emily's cheeks flamed with humiliation. Of course Hoskins had been watching, had drawn his own conclusions. Of course he'd shared her shame with the first person who walked through the door. That's not... he's just... She stumbled over the words, unable to complete the lie. The stranger held up a hand, gentle but firm. "Please, don't distress yourself with explanations you don't owe me. I only ask because..." He paused, seemed to wrestle with something internal, then continued, "Because I might be able to help with your situation." Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. Help? What kind of help could a stranger offer? And what would he expect in return? She'd heard stories of women in desperate circumstances, of the compromises they were forced to make, the degradations they endured. Her hand moved protectively to her belly. The man must have read the fear in her face because he took a step back, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "I'm not suggesting anything improper, ma'am. I'm a widower with 2 young children who need a woman's care. You're a woman in need of a home and protection. I'm proposing an arrangement that might benefit us both." Emily stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "An arrangement?" "A marriage of convenience," the man said bluntly. "A partnership, if you will. I need a mother for my children. You need a father for your baby and a roof over your head. We could help each other." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This stranger, this man whose name she didn't even know, was proposing marriage to her? A woman abandoned by her husband, pregnant with another man's child, with nothing to offer but empty hands and a desperate need? "This is insane," Emily whispered. "Yes," the man agreed readily. "It is. But we're living in insane times, in an insane place. Sometimes survival requires insane decisions. I don't even know your name." "James Calder. I own a cattle ranch about 15 miles north of here. Been working it alone since my wife Catherine died last winter. Scarlet fever took her fast. She was gone in 3 days." His voice remained steady, but Emily heard the grief beneath it, old but still sharp. "Left me with David, who's 8, and Lila, who just turned 5. I've been managing with the help of my ranch hands, but children need more than managing. They need nurturing, love. Things I can't give them, not the way they need." Emily's mind reeled. "Mr. Calder, you can't possibly. I mean, you don't know anything about me. I could be anyone, a thief, a criminal. Are you?" "No, but—" "Then we're starting from a place of honesty." James Calder's storm gray eyes held hers. "Look, Mrs. Forgive me, I don't know your name." "Parker. Emily Parker." "Mrs. Parker, I'm not offering you romance or even affection. I'm offering you a transaction. You care for my children and household, and I provide you and your baby with a home, food, and my name for protection. In this territory, an unmarried pregnant woman—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both knew the harsh judgment society would pass on her, the limited and degrading options available to women in her position. "Why?" Emily asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" James was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "Because Catherine was a stranger once, too. Her family died of cholera, and she was alone in St. Louis with nowhere to go. I married her because it was practical. I needed a wife. She needed a husband. But over time—" His voice softened. "Over time, we built something real. Love came later, slowly, but it came. She made my house a home. She gave me children. She taught me that the heart can find its way even when it starts from necessity." He looked back at Emily, and she saw in his eyes a reflection of her own loss and loneliness. "I'm not promising you love, Mrs. Parker, but I'm promising you respect, safety, and a chance. That's more than this desert will give you if you stay here." Emily's breath came in shallow gasps. Her mind screamed warnings. This was madness, accepting a proposal from a man she'd known for mere minutes, tying her fate to a complete stranger. But her heart, her exhausted, battered, desperate heart, whispered something different. "What choice do you have?" "Your children," Emily said slowly. "They would accept me? A stranger coming into their home, taking their mother's place?" "Their children who've been without a mother's touch for 8 months, James replied. "David's trying to be the man of the house at 8 years old, and it's crushing him. Lila asks me every night when Mama's coming home because she doesn't understand that death is forever. They need someone, Mrs. Parker. And frankly, so do you." Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical force. Images flashed through her mind. Thomas riding away without a backward glance, the empty coins in her pocket, the baby growing inside her who would need food, shelter, a future. 2 motherless children she'd never met who were depending on a stranger's kindness. When she opened her eyes, James Calder was still watching her with that steady, patient gaze. "If I agree," Emily said carefully, "what would you expect of me? What would this marriage entail?" James seemed to consider his words. "You would run the household, cooking, cleaning, caring for the children. I'd provide everything you need for those tasks. As for—" He cleared his throat, a faint color rising in his weathered cheeks. "As for marital relations, I'd leave that to your discretion, when and if you're ever comfortable, but never as an obligation. Your bedroom would be your own." The relief that washed through Emily was so intense it left her dizzy. "And the baby? Would be raised as mine, with my name and all the rights and protections that provides. No one needs to know any different. And if this doesn't work, if we find we can't bear each other, then we'll deal with that if and when it comes. But Mrs. Parker, I'm a man of my word. If you agree to this, I'll honor my commitments to you and your child regardless of personal feelings." Emily looked at him, really looked at him, searching for deception, for hidden cruelty, for any sign that this was too good to be true. But all she saw was a tired, lonely man offering a lifeline to a desperate woman, asking for help in return. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if weighing in on the decision. "How soon?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. "There's a circuit preacher due in the next town over tomorrow. We could be married by afternoon, at the ranch by evening." Tomorrow. In less than 24 hours, she could go from abandoned wife to married woman, from homeless and destitute to mistress of a ranch she'd never seen. The speed of it made her head spin. "I need to think," Emily said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew them for a lie. What was there to think about? She could accept James Calder's proposal and have a chance at survival, or she could refuse and face certain ruin. James nodded. "Of course. I'll get a room at the boarding house in town, come back at first light. You can give me your answer then." He started to turn away, then paused. "Mrs. Parker? For what it's worth, I hope you say yes, not just for my sake or the children's, but for yours. Everyone deserves a second chance." He walked back to his horse, moving with that same easy grace, and swung into the saddle. With a final touch to his hat brim, he rode off toward town, leaving Emily alone with the setting sun and the most important decision of her life. Hoskins emerged from the station, eyeing her with undisguised curiosity. "You gonna marry that cowboy?" "I don't know," Emily said honestly. "Well, figure it out quick. He's right about one thing. Unmarried pregnant women don't fare well out here. You'd be lucky to get work as a laundress, and even then—" He shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its dismissal of her prospects. Emily didn't respond. She sat on that hard bench as the sun sank lower, painting the desert in shades of orange and red and purple. The temperature dropped with surprising speed, the day's heat bleeding away to leave a chill that made her pull her shawl tighter. She thought about Thomas, about the life they'd planned together that had dissolved like morning mist. She thought about her parents, dead and buried in Missouri soil, unable to guide her now. She thought about the baby, her baby, who would be born into whatever world she created in these next hours. And she thought about James Calder with his storm-gray eyes and his matter-of-fact proposal, offering her something she'd thought lost forever, a future. As full dark settled over the desert and the stars began to emerge in impossible numbers, Emily made her choice. It wasn't really a choice at all. It was survival, pure and simple. But perhaps survival was enough to start with. Perhaps, as James had suggested, the rest could come later. She would marry him. She would go to his ranch, care for his children, build a life from the wreckage of her dreams. And maybe, just maybe, she would find that second chance James had mentioned. Emily stood, her hand supporting her lower back as she straightened, and walked into the station where Hoskins sat by a smoky lamp. "Do you have paper and a pen?" she asked. Hoskins grunted and produced both from beneath the counter. Emily sat and wrote carefully, her hand steady despite the tremors in her heart. "Mr. Calder, I accept your proposal. I will be ready at first light. Emily Parker." She folded the note and handed it to Hoskins. "When Mr. Calder returns in the morning, please give him this." Hoskins took the note, examining it as if he could read through the paper. "You sure about this? Man's practically a stranger." "No more a stranger than this desert," Emily replied, "and considerably less likely to kill me." She paid Hoskins her last 17 cents for a place to sleep on the floor of the station's storage room, wrapped herself in her shawl, and lay down on the hard-packed earth. Through the thin walls, she could hear the night sounds of the desert, the distant cry of a coyote, the whisper of wind through sagebrush, the settling of old wood. Tomorrow, her life would change completely. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. James Calder, mistress of a ranch she'd never seen, mother to children she'd never met. Tomorrow, she would begin again. As Emily closed her eyes, one hand resting on her belly, she whispered a prayer into the darkness, not for love or happiness, but simply for the strength to survive whatever came next. And perhaps, buried deep beneath her fear and uncertainty, there was the smallest seed of hope. After all, she'd been abandoned at a stagecoach stop with nothing, and a stranger had offered her everything. If that wasn't a kind of miracle, what was?
casa.
The morning came too quickly and too slowly all at once. Emily woke before dawn, her back aching from the hard floor, her mind immediately flooding with the magnitude of what she was about to do. Through the small window, she could see the sky lightening from black to deep blue, stars fading one by one. She stood carefully, brushing dust from her dress, the same dress she'd been wearing for 2 days now, wrinkled and stained with travel. It was hardly appropriate attire for a wedding, even one as unconventional as this, but it was all she had. In the dim light, Emily finger-combed her dark hair, pinching her cheeks to bring some color to her pale face. She looked at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror Hoskins kept on the wall, a thin woman with haunted eyes and a swollen belly, wearing yesterday's dress and tomorrow's fears. This is who James Calder is getting, she thought. Not some fresh-faced bride full of dreams, but a used-up woman with a bastard child and broken trust. The creak of the front door made her turn. Through the doorway, she could see Hoskins shuffling outside, then heard the low rumble of men's voices. Her heart began to pound. This was it, the point of no return. Emily smoothed her dress one final time and walked out into the early morning light. James Calder stood by his horse, looking much as he had yesterday, solid, weathered, real. When he saw her, he straightened, his eyes searching her face. "Mrs. Parker," he said quietly. "You're certain?" Emily lifted her chin, drawing on reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. "I'm certain, Mr. Calder." He nodded slowly, and something that might have been relief crossed his features. "Then we should be going. It's a 2-hour ride to town, and the preacher keeps early hours." He helped her mount the pack horse, a gentle mare with kind eyes, with a consideration for her condition that made Emily's throat tight. When had Thomas ever shown such care? When had anyone? They rode in silence as the sun climbed higher, turning the desert gold. Emily focused on staying in the saddle, on breathing through the discomfort, on not thinking about what lay ahead. But as the miles passed, curiosity began to overcome her apprehension. "Your children," she said finally, breaking the quiet. "Tell me about them." James was silent for so long Emily thought he might not answer. Then, "David's the serious one. Takes after his mother in temperament. Thoughtful, careful, always trying to do the right thing. Since Catherine died, he's been trying to fill her shoes, trying to take care of Lila and the house and me." His voice roughened. "It's too much for a boy his age, but he won't stop trying." "And Lila?" A smile touched James's lips, small but genuine. "Lila's pure sunshine when she's happy, a thunderstorm when she's not. She loved her mother fiercely, and losing her," he shook his head. "She's confused, angry sometimes. Other times she's just a little girl who wants her mama. She still sets a place at the table for Catherine, talks to her at night." Emily's heart ached for these children she'd never met. "That must be difficult for you." "It's harder on them than me. I had time with Catherine, almost 10 years of marriage. They only had a few years, and for Lila, those memories are already fading. That's what breaks my heart, watching my daughter forget the woman who gave her life." They rode on, and Emily found herself thinking about the strange shape her life was taking. Yesterday morning, she'd been Thomas Parker's wife, traveling west on broken promises. Now she was about to become James Calder's wife, riding toward a future she couldn't imagine. "Mr. Calder," she said softly, "what will you tell the children about me? About this situation?" "The truth, within reason. That you're a woman in need of a home, and we're in need of a mother for them. That we're helping each other. Children understand practical arrangements. They see it in the animal world all the time. What they need to know is that you're there to stay, that you won't leave them like Catherine did. And the baby? Will be their brother or sister. Blood doesn't make family, Mrs. Parker. Love does." The simplicity of his statement, the quiet conviction in his voice, made Emily's eyes sting with unexpected tears. When had anyone spoken of love in her presence? When had anyone suggested she was worthy of building a family? The town materialized from the desert heat, a small collection of buildings clustered around a main street, the church steeple rising above the rest. James led them directly to a modest white building with a cross above the door. "Wait here," he said, dismounting. "I'll fetch the preacher." Emily sat on the horse, her hands trembling on the reins, watching as James disappeared inside. Minutes later, he emerged with an elderly man in black clothes, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. The preacher helped Emily down from the horse with gentle hands. "Mrs. Parker, I'm Reverend Hughes. Mr. Calder has explained your situation. I must ask, are you entering into this marriage of your own free will?" "Yes," Emily said, and was surprised to find it was true. She was choosing this, choosing survival, choosing to trust a stranger over the certain destruction of staying alone. "And you understand the sacred nature of matrimony, the vows you're about to take?" Emily thought of the vows she'd made to Thomas, of how little they'd meant to him. "I understand that marriage is a commitment, Reverend. I don't take it lightly." The preacher studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well, come inside." The church was small and plain, smelling of beeswax and old wood. Sunlight streamed through simple windows, painting the floor in blocks of gold. There was no music, no flowers, no gathered witnesses, just Emily and James standing before the altar, with Reverend Hughes between them. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Emily felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a physical thing. The ceremony was mercifully brief. The traditional words washed over her. For better or worse, in sickness and health, till death do us part, and Emily spoke her responses in a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone else. James's voice was steady, firm, his answers given without hesitation. Then came the exchange of rings. James produced a simple gold band from his pocket. Catherine's ring, Emily realized with a jolt. He saw her recognition and leaned close to whisper, "It's just for appearances. I'll get you one of your own when I can." But Emily shook her head slightly. "No, this is fitting. I'm taking her place after all." She slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling the weight of another woman's life, another woman's love settling onto her hand. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona and Almighty God, I now pronounce you man and wife. Mr. Calder, you may kiss your bride." James looked at Emily, a question in his eyes, and she gave the smallest nod. His lips brushed hers. Chaste, brief, a formality rather than a promise. But even that slight contact sent a shock through her system. She was married again, bound to this stranger who was now her husband. They signed the certificate, Emily's hand shaking as she wrote her new name for the first time, Emily Calder. And then it was done. She was no longer Emily Parker, abandoned wife. She was Emily Calder, ranch wife and mother to children she'd never met. James settled the preacher's fee and guided Emily back outside, where the morning sun had grown harsh and bright. "There's a general store down the street," he said. "We should get you some necessities before we head to the ranch." In the store, James moved with quiet efficiency, selecting fabric for dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, a warm coat for the coming winter. Emily stood mutely by, overwhelmed by the sight of money being spent on her needs. "Pick out what you'd like," James said, gesturing to a display of ribbons and small luxuries. "I don't need—" "Mrs. Calder." His use of her new name made her start. "You're my wife now. What kind of husband would I be if I didn't provide for you properly?" Emily selected a few items with trembling hands, a hairbrush, some soap that smelled of lavender, a packet of needles and thread. Small things, but after 2 days of having nothing, they felt like treasures. As James loaded the packages onto the horses, Emily noticed a small mercantile across the street with toys displayed in the window. Before she could talk herself out of it, she crossed over and purchased 2 items with money she didn't have: a wooden horse for David and a rag doll for Lila. If she was going to be their mother, she should arrive with something more than empty hands. James raised an eyebrow when he saw her purchases, but said nothing, simply securing them with the other packages. "Ready?" he asked. Emily looked back at the town, her last chance to change her mind, to flee this insane bargain. But where would she go? What would she do? "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. They rode north into country that grew gradually greener, following a trail that wound between rocky outcroppings and stands of juniper. James pointed out landmarks, the mesa where he sometimes saw wild horses, the creek that ran year-round, the property line that marked the beginning of his land. "It's not much," he said as they topped a rise and the ranch came into view below. 300 acres, about 50 head of cattle, a few horses. The house needs work. Catherine always wanted to add on, but we never got around to it. Emily barely heard him. She was staring at the collection of buildings in the valley. A main house, a barn, several outbuildings, all of it looking solid and permanent in a way that made her heart ache with something dangerously close to hope. This was her home now. These buildings, this land, those children waiting inside, all of it was hers to care for, to build a life around. As they approached the house, the front door burst open and two small figures came running out. Emily's first sight of David and Lila Calder would be forever burned into her memory. A serious-faced boy with his father's storm-gray eyes and a little girl with wild blonde curls, both of them skidding to a stop when they saw the stranger on the horse beside their father. "Papa!" Lila shouted, her voice high and clear. "You're home! Who's that lady?" James dismounted and crouched down to his children's level, gathering them both in his arms. Emily saw the naked love on his face, the way he held them as if they were the most precious things in the world, and something inside her cracked open. This was what a father looked like. This was love. "David, Lila," James said, his voice gentle. "I want you to meet someone very special. This is Mrs. Calder. She's going to be living with us now." David's eyes went wide with comprehension, but Lila just looked confused. "Why? Where's Mama?" Emily saw James flinch, saw the pain flash across his face. Before he could answer, she slid down from her horse, ungainly with her pregnant belly but determined, and approached the children slowly. "Your Mama is in heaven," Emily said softly, kneeling down despite the protest of her aching back. "And she can't come back. But your Papa thought, well, he thought maybe you needed someone here on earth to take care of you. And I need someone to take care of too, so we're going to help each other." Lila stared at her, those blue eyes, Catherine's eyes, Emily realized, searching her face. "Are you going to be our new Mama?" Emily's breath caught. How did she answer that? How could she possibly fill those shoes? "I'm going to try my very best to take care of you," Emily said carefully. "If you'll let me." David, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. His voice was surprisingly mature for an 8-year-old. "Papa says you have a baby coming." "Yes," Emily confirmed, "in about 3 months." "Will it be our brother or sister?" Emily looked at James, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, if that's all right with you." David considered this seriously. "I guess it'll be nice to not be the only boy. If it's a boy, I mean." "What if it's a girl?" Lila demanded, hands on her hips in a gesture so endearing Emily wanted to cry. "I want a sister." "Then you'll have a sister," Emily said, smiling despite herself. "But we won't know until the baby comes." Lila stepped closer, studying Emily's belly with frank curiosity. "Can I touch it?" Before Emily could answer, Lila's small hand pressed against the swell of her stomach. As if in response, the baby kicked, hard enough that even Lila could feel it. The little girl's eyes went round with wonder. "It moved! The baby moved!" "That means the baby knows you're there," Emily said softly, "that you're going to be its big sister." Lila looked up at Emily with something like awe, and Emily felt her heart crack open a little more. These children, these precious, wounded, hopeful children, needed her. And God help her, she needed them too. David remained more reserved, watching this interaction with careful eyes. But when Emily met his gaze, she saw not hostility, but caution. He'd been hurt by loss, by change. He wouldn't trust easily, and Emily couldn't blame him. "Come inside," James said, his voice rough with emotion. "Let's get you settled, Mrs. Calder." Mrs. Calder. Her new name, her new life, her new family. Emily stood, David immediately offering his hand to help her up, the gesture so gentlemanly it made her want to weep, and followed the Calders into the house. The interior was neat but sparse, with the unmistakable signs of a home without a woman's touch. Emily saw dust on the mantel, dishes stacked haphazardly in the kitchen, children's clothes draped over furniture. But she also saw signs of effort. The floor was swept, the windows clean, the table set for dinner even though it was barely noon. "It's not much," James began, but Emily cut him off. "It's wonderful. and she meant it. After 2 days of having nothing, of facing a future in the wilderness alone, this simple ranch house felt like a palace. James showed her around, the main room with its fireplace, the kitchen with its wood stove, the 2 bedrooms where the children slept. Then he led her to a 3rd room, smaller than the others, with a single window overlooking the valley. "This was Catherine's sewing room," he said quietly, "but it's yours now, for as long as you need your own space." Emily looked at the room, empty except for a narrow bed and a small dresser, and felt tears threaten again. He'd kept his promise, her own room, her own space, no obligations except those she chose to take on. "Thank you," she whispered. James nodded, then cleared his throat. "I'll bring in your packages. The children can show you where everything is. Dinner's usually around 6, but we're flexible. Whatever you need, just ask." He left her there, in her new room in her new house, and Emily sank onto the bed, her hands shaking. She'd done it. She'd married a stranger and moved to a ranch and taken on 2 children and a whole new life. And she had no idea if she could actually do any of it. A small knock on the door made her look up. Leela stood in the doorway, the rag doll Emily had bought clutched in her arms. "Papa gave me this," the little girl said. "He said you picked it out for me." "I did," Emily confirmed. "Do you like her?" Lila nodded vigorously, then took a step into the room. "What should I call you? You're not my real mama, but Papa said you're Mrs. Calder now." Emily's heart squeezed. This was the question she'd been dreading. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, sweetheart. Emily is fine, if you'd prefer." Lila thought about this very seriously. I think, Miss Emily, like you're special, but not trying to replace Mama." "Miss Emily sounds perfect," Emily said, her voice thick. The little girl smiled, the first real smile Emily had seen from her, and suddenly flung herself at Emily, wrapping small arms around her neck. "I'm glad you're here, Miss Emily. Papa's been so sad." Emily held the child, feeling the trust implicit in that embrace, and knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened, whatever difficulties lay ahead, she would do everything in her power to protect this little girl and her brother. She'd been abandoned at a stagecoach stop, left pregnant and alone in the desert, but that abandonment had led her here, to this moment, to these children who needed her as much as she needed them. Maybe James had been right. Maybe they could help each other. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something real from this practical arrangement. As Lila pulled back and started chattering about showing Emily her room and all her treasures, Emily allowed herself the smallest smile. She was Emily Calder now. And for the first time in days, maybe in years, she felt like that name might actually mean something, like it might mean hope. The first week at the Calder Ranch passed in a blur of exhaustion and discovery. Emily woke each morning before dawn, her body protesting the unfamiliar labor, her mind spinning with the 1,000 tasks that demanded her attention. The house that had seemed charming at first glance revealed itself to be a monument to neglect, not willful, but the inevitable result of a widower and 2 children trying to maintain a home without the knowledge or energy to do it properly. On her second morning, Emily discovered the true state of the kitchen. The larder was sparse, containing mostly beans, flour, and salt pork. The pots were scorched from inexpert cooking, the knives dull, the towels stained beyond redemption. She stood in the middle of the room, one hand pressed to her aching back, and wondered where to even begin. "Miss Emily?" David's voice came from the doorway, tentative and careful. "Papa says breakfast is usually just coffee and whatever bread's left from the night before." Emily turned to find the boy watching her with those serious gray eyes, waiting for judgment or disappointment. Instead, she smiled. "Well, David, I think we can do better than that. How do you feel about pancakes?" The boy's eyes widened. "Real pancakes? Not the burnt kind Papa makes?" "The very real kind. But I'll need your help. Can you fetch me eggs from the hen house?" David nodded eagerly and darted outside. Emily set to work, mixing batter with practiced hands despite the unfamiliar kitchen. The motions soothed her. This, at least, she knew how to do. Her mother had taught her to cook before the fever took her, and those skills had served Emily well in her brief marriage to Thomas. She was flipping the first pancake when Lila appeared, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her blonde curls a wild tangle around her face. "What smells so good?" the little girl asked, climbing onto a chair to watch. Breakfast, Emily said, plating the golden pancake and drizzling it with molasses from a jar she'd found in the back of the cupboard. Here, taste this and tell me if it needs anything. Lila took a bite, and her entire face transformed with delight. It's perfect. It's the best thing I ever tasted. The pure joy in the child's voice made Emily's throat tight. How long had it been since these children had experienced simple pleasures? How long had they been making do with burnt bread and their father's well-meaning but inadequate attempts at cooking? By the time James came in from his early morning chores, the table was laden with stacks of pancakes, fresh eggs scrambled with herbs Emily had found growing wild near the back door, and coffee that actually smelled inviting instead of like scorched chicory. James stopped in the doorway, staring at the spread as if he'd never seen food before. You did all this? It's just breakfast, Mr. Calder, Emily said, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing fancy. Papa, you have to try it. Lila bounced in her seat. Miss Emily's the best cook in the whole world. James sat down slowly, his eyes moving from the food to Emily to the children's animated faces. When he took his first bite, Emily saw his expression shift. Surprise, then something deeper. Pleasure, yes, but also grief. This was Catherine's role he was seeing filled, Catherine's absence made visible by Emily's presence. It's very good, he said quietly. Thank you, Mrs. Calder. They ate in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. Emily watched the children devour their food with an appetite that spoke of months of inadequate meals, and she made mental notes. More protein. Fresh vegetables. She'd need to find out if there was a garden, and if not, start one. Milk for the children, if there was a cow. After breakfast, while James headed back outside and David reluctantly trudged off to feed the chickens, Lila attached herself to Emily's side like a small, chattering shadow. Mama used to make pancakes on Sundays, the little girl said, following Emily to the sink. But not as good as yours. Don't tell Mama I said that. She might be sad in heaven. Emily's hands stilled in the dishwater. I think your mama would be happy that you're eating well and being taken care of. That's what mothers want most. Do you think Mama knows about you? Do you think she sent you to us? The question was so earnest, so hopeful, that Emily had to blink back tears. I don't know, sweetheart, but I'd like to think she'd be glad you have someone here to look after you. Lila considered this, then nodded as if settling something in her own mind. I think she would be. Papa's not very good at girl things, you know. He tries, but he doesn't know how to braid hair or which dress goes with which pinafore. Well then, after we finish the dishes, why don't we see about taming those curls of yours? The smile Lila gave her was like sunshine breaking through clouds, and Emily felt something in her chest loosen. Maybe she couldn't replace Catherine. Maybe she shouldn't even try. But she could be here, present, giving these children what they needed now. The days developed a rhythm. Emily woke before dawn, her pregnant body protesting, but her will stronger. She'd light the stove, start the coffee, and begin preparing breakfast while the house was still quiet. James would come in from checking the stock, David from gathering eggs, Lila from whatever adventure she'd created in the few minutes she'd been awake. They'd eat together, this makeshift family, learning each other's habits and preferences. After breakfast, James would head out to work the ranch with his 2 hired hands, men Emily had barely met, who took their meals in the bunkhouse and seemed to view her appearance with a mixture of curiosity and relief. David would do his morning chores, then reluctantly settle at the kitchen table where Emily had started teaching him his letters and numbers. Catherine had begun his education, but it had fallen by the wayside after her death. I don't see why I need to know reading, David grumbled on the 3rd day, his pencil moving grudgingly across the slate. Papa doesn't read much, and he runs the whole ranch. Your papa reads enough to manage accounts and contracts, Emily corrected gently. And he'd probably tell you he wishes he'd had more schooling. Besides, don't you want to read the adventure stories in those books I saw on the shelf? That got his attention. You mean the ones with the cowboys and Indians? Papa said those were Mama's, and we shouldn't touch them. I think your mama would want you to read them, Emily said, but you have to finish your lessons first. It was a small victory when David bent over his slate with renewed focus, but Emily treasured it nonetheless. Lila was a different challenge altogether. The little girl was bright and curious but scattered, her attention flitting from one thing to another like a butterfly. She wanted to help with everything and succeeded at almost nothing, leaving a trail of spilled flour and tangled yarn in her wake. But her enthusiasm was infectious, and Emily found herself laughing more in those first few days than she had in months. "Miss Emily, watch this," Lila would call out a dozen times a day, then proceed to demonstrate some feat. A cartwheel that ended in a tumble, a song she'd made up, a rock she'd found that was definitely magic. Emily watched it all, praised what deserved praising, and gently redirected the more dangerous impulses. And slowly, carefully, she began to win Lila's trust completely. It was harder with David. The boy was polite, helpful even, but Emily sensed a wall between them. He watched her with those careful eyes, weighing her actions, comparing them to some internal standard she couldn't see. She was being tested, and she had no idea if she was passing. On the fourth night, Emily discovered why. She was putting away laundry in the children's room when she found it, a small wooden box hidden under David's bed. Inside were treasures, a locket with Catherine's picture, a handkerchief embroidered with her initials, a pressed flower, and a letter. Emily knew she shouldn't read it, but the first line caught her eye. "My dearest David, if you're reading this, I am gone." It was Catherine's goodbye letter to her son, written in those final fevered days. Emily's hand shook as she carefully placed it back in the box, her heart breaking for the boy who'd lost his mother and was now watching another woman take her place. That night, after the children were in bed, Emily found James in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. He looked up when she entered, surprise crossing his features. "Mrs. Calder? Is something wrong?" Emily wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "I found Catherine's letter to David, the one she wrote before she died." James's expression shuddered. "He keeps it hidden. Thinks I don't know about it." "He's afraid," Emily said softly. "Afraid of forgetting her. Afraid of betraying her memory by accepting me." James set down the brush he'd been using and leaned against the stall door. "I don't know how to help him with that. How do you tell a child it's okay to move forward without feeling like you're asking them to leave their mother behind? You tell them the truth. That loving someone new doesn't mean loving someone less. That hearts don't have a limit on how much they can hold." James looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his gray eyes. "Is that what you believe? After what your husband did to you?" Emily flinched. They hadn't spoken about Thomas since that first day, hadn't acknowledged the betrayal that had brought her here. "What Thomas did taught me what love isn't. Maybe being here is teaching me what it could be." The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to explore. Finally, James cleared his throat. "David will come around. He's a good boy, just wounded. Give him time." "Time I can give," Emily said. "I'm not going anywhere." As she turned to leave, James called out, "Mrs. Calder?" "Emily." The use of her given name stopped her. "Thank you for everything you're doing, for the children, for the house, for trying." Emily nodded, not trusting her voice, and walked back to the house under a sky dense with stars. The breakthrough with David came unexpectedly, on a Sunday afternoon in her second week at the ranch. Emily was in the kitchen, working on mending a pile of clothes that had accumulated to enormous proportions, when she heard a crash from outside followed by David's cry of pain. She was out the door before she could think, moving faster than should have been possible in her condition. She found David in the yard, clutching his arm, his face white with pain. A ladder lay toppled beside the barn, and Emily could see what had happened. The boy had been trying to repair the roof, probably trying to be the man of the house like he always did, and he'd fallen. "Let me see," Emily said, kneeling beside him despite her protruding belly. Her hands were gentle but firm as she examined his arm. Not broken, she didn't think, but badly sprained. "We need to get you inside. Can you walk?" David nodded, tears streaming down his face, tears he was clearly trying to suppress. Emily helped him up, and they made their slow way to the house. She settled him at the kitchen table, then set about making a cold compress in a sling from a torn sheet. "I was trying to fix the roof," David said through gritted teeth as Emily wrapped his arm. "Papa's been so busy with the spring calving, and I saw the shingles were loose, and I thought, You thought you could handle it yourself, Emily finished, because that's what you always do, isn't it? Try to take care of everything and everyone, even when it's too much for you. David's lip trembled. I'm the man of the house when Papa's working. Mama said, Your mama said that because she needed you when she was sick, Emily interrupted gently. But David, you're 8 years old. You're supposed to be a boy, not a man. That's not a failure. That's just the truth. Something in David cracked then. The careful control he'd maintained for months shattered, and he dissolved into tears, real tears, the kind that came from deep inside, from a place of grief and exhaustion and overwhelming responsibility. Emily pulled him close, as much as her pregnant belly would allow, and let him cry. She stroked his hair and murmured soothing nonsense, and when his sobs finally subsided, she said, It's okay to miss your mama. It's okay to be sad. It's even okay to be angry that she left you, but David, you can't carry the weight of this whole family on your shoulders. That's what your papa and I are for. David pulled back, wiping his eyes on his sleeve. But you're not my real mama. You're just here because you needed a place to stay. The word should have hurt, but Emily heard the question beneath them. That's how I got here, yes. But that's not why I'm staying. I'm staying because you and Lila need someone, and I need to be needed. I'm staying because your papa is a good man who deserves help. And I'm staying because even though I've only known you for 2 weeks, I already care about what happens to you. You do? David's voice was small, uncertain. I do. You're a remarkable boy, David called her. Smart and brave and so good. Any woman would be proud to be your mother, even if she didn't give birth to you. David was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then, my real mama, she was wonderful. I don't want to forget her. You won't, Emily promised. I won't let you. We'll talk about her, remember her, keep her alive in our hearts. I'm not here to replace her, David. I'm here to add to your family, not erase what was. The boy studied her face, searching for deception, for false promises. Whatever he found must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. Okay, Miss Emily. It was the first time he'd called her that, and the name settled over Emily like a benediction. When James came home that evening and saw David's bandaged arm, his face went pale. What happened? I fell off the ladder trying to fix the barn roof, David admitted, then quickly added, but Miss Emily took care of me. She made it better. James looked at Emily over his son's head, gratitude and something else, something warmer in his eyes. Thank you, he mouthed silently. That night, after the children were asleep, James knocked on Emily's door. She answered in her nightgown, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and felt suddenly vulnerable seeing him in the dim lamplight. I wanted to say thank you properly, James said, for David. He hasn't let himself cry since Catherine died. He's been holding it all in, trying to be strong. You gave him permission to be a child again. He's a good boy, Emily said softly. He just needed to know it was okay to not be perfect. James smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. You're good with them. Better than I dared hope. Catherine would have... He stopped, swallowed hard. She would have liked you. The compliment made Emily's eyes sting. I hope so. I'm trying to honor her memory, not erase it. I know. The children know too. That's why they're starting to trust you. James hesitated, then added, I'm starting to trust you too, Emily. Starting to think maybe this arrangement could work out for all of us. After he left, Emily lay in her narrow bed, one hand on her growing belly, and allowed herself to hope. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, and Emily whispered to it in the darkness. We're going to be okay. We have a home now, a family. We're going to be okay. The third week brought new challenges. The baby was growing larger, making even simple tasks difficult. Emily's back ached constantly, her ankles swelled, and she tired easily. But she pushed through, determined not to be a burden, determined to prove her worth. It was Lila who noticed first. Miss Emily, you look tired. Maybe you should rest. I'm fine, sweetheart, Emily said, though she was anything but. She was in the middle of scrubbing the kitchen floor, a task that required her to be on her hands and knees, nearly impossible with her belly in the way. Mama used to rest when she was tired, Lila said seriously. She'd sit in the rocking chair and drink tea, and we'd read stories together. The image was so lovely, so normal, that Emily felt tears prick her eyes. That sounds wonderful. Maybe later. No, now, Lila insisted with the stubbornness only a 5-year-old could muster. David, come help me. Before Emily could protest, both children were there, taking the scrub brush from her hands, helping her to her feet, and guiding her to the rocking chair by the fireplace. David brought her a cup of tea. Too sweet, but made with care. Lila brought a blanket and her favorite book. Now, Lila declared, climbing into Emily's lap, as much as the baby would allow, you rest and read to us. Emily looked at these two children, her children now, in all the ways that mattered, and felt her heart swell. All right, what shall we read? The one about the princess and the pea, Lila said immediately. David rolled his eyes but settled at Emily's feet. That's a baby story. Then you pick the next one, Emily said diplomatically. She read for an hour, her voice growing hoarse but her spirit lifting with every page. The children listened raptly, and when James came in for lunch, he stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene with an expression Emily couldn't quite read. Don't stop on my account, he said quietly. It's good to hear laughter in this house again. That evening, as Emily prepared dinner, a hearty stew with vegetables she'd convinced James to buy at the general store, she felt him watching her from the doorway. You're doing too much, he said finally. You need to rest more. The baby is fine, Emily said, though she was touched by his concern. I'm fine. I'm not made of glass, Mr. Calder. James, he said. You should call me James. We're married after all, even if it's just on paper. Emily turned to look at him fully. James, then. And you're right. I should rest more. But there's so much to do, and I want to be useful. I want to earn my place here. Emily, his voice was gentle but firm. You've more than earned your place. The children adore you. The house hasn't been this well run in a long time. You don't have to prove anything. Don't I? Emily set down the spoon she'd been using to stir the stew. I'm the stranger you married out of desperation, the pregnant woman you took in out of pity. I need to show you that I'm worth the trouble. James crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping close enough that Emily could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. Emily Calder, listen to me. You are not trouble. You are not a burden. You are a blessing to this family. And if you can't see that, then I haven't been doing my job as your husband. But we're not really married, Emily whispered. Not in the way that matters. Aren't we? James's voice was low, intense. We made vows before God. We share a home, share children. You wear my name and my mother's ring. What part of that isn't real? Emily's breath caught. She'd been thinking of this as temporary, as conditional, a business arrangement that could be dissolved if it didn't work out. But James was right. They were bound now, for better or worse, and somewhere along the way it had started to become real. I'm scared, she admitted. Scared of failing you. Scared of failing the children. Scared that I'll wake up, and this will all be gone, like it was with Thomas. James's hand came up slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently cupped her cheek. I'm not Thomas. I don't make promises I can't keep, and I don't abandon people who depend on me. You're safe here, Emily. You and the baby both. Emily leaned into his touch, starved for kindness, for the simple human contact she'd been denied for so long. How can you be so sure? You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave. Brave enough to accept help from a stranger when your world fell apart. I know you're kind. I see it in how you treat my children. I know you're strong. You work yourself to exhaustion every day and never complain. That's enough to build on. The baby kicked then, hard enough that James must have felt it through Emily's dress. His eyes widened with wonder, and without thinking, Emily took his hand and placed it on her belly, letting him feel the life growing there. That's your child now, she said softly. In every way that matters, this baby is yours. Are you ready for that? James's hand was warm and solid against her belly, and when the baby kicked again, Emily saw tears in his eyes. Yes, he said hoarsely. God help me. Yes, I'm ready. They stood like that for a long moment, connected by touch and promise, by the child between them and the children sleeping upstairs. Then James cleared his throat and stepped back, propriety reasserting itself. "The stew smells good," he said, his voice rough. "I'll get the children." As he left the kitchen, Emily pressed her hand where his had been, feeling the baby's movements and her own racing heart. Something had shifted between them tonight. Some invisible boundary had been crossed. They were no longer strangers playing at marriage. They were partners, building something real from necessity and hope. The fourth week brought a crisis that tested everything Emily had built. A spring storm rolled in, violent and unexpected, bringing driving rain and winds that threatened to tear the barn roof off. James and the ranch hands worked frantically to secure the animals and buildings, leaving Emily alone with the children in the house. Lila was terrified of storms, a fact Emily discovered when the first crack of thunder sent the little girl screaming into her arms. David tried to be brave, but Emily could see the fear in his eyes as the wind howled and the house shook. "It's all right," Emily soothed, gathering both children close. "The house is strong. Your papa built it to withstand storms like this." "But what about Papa?" Lila sobbed. "What if the storm takes him?" "Your papa is the strongest, smartest man in this county," Emily said with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. "He knows how to handle storms. He'll be fine." But as the hours wore on and James didn't return, Emily's own fear grew. She kept the children occupied with stories and songs, with warm milk and cookies, with anything to distract them from the violence outside. But inside, her mind conjured terrible scenarios. James crushed by falling timber, struck by lightning, lost in the storm. When the door finally burst open near midnight, Emily's relief was so intense she nearly collapsed. James stood there, soaked to the skin, mud-splattered and exhausted, but alive. "Papa!" The children launched themselves at him, not caring about the mud and water. "I'm all right," James assured them, his eyes finding Emily's over their heads. "Everything's all right. The worst has passed." Emily nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The children's fear for their father had mirrored her own, and in that moment she realized a terrifying truth. She cared about James Calder, not just as the provider of her security, not just as the father of the children she was growing to love, but as a man, as her husband, in all the ways that mattered. After the children were settled back in bed, Emily heated water for James to wash. She brought him clean clothes, then lingered in the kitchen, unable to go to her own room. "You should be sleeping," James said, appearing in the doorway in dry clothes, his hair still damp. "It's late, and you need rest." "I was worried," Emily admitted. "When you didn't come back, I thought—" "You thought the storm had claimed me." James moved closer. "Emily, I've weathered dozens of storms like this. It takes more than wind and rain to bring down a stubborn cowboy." "It's not funny," Emily said, her voice breaking. "Those children upstairs have already lost one parent. They can't lose another." "And you?" James asked quietly. "What about you, Emily? What would you have lost?" Emily looked up at him, this man who'd saved her from destitution, who'd given her a home and family, who was slowly, inexorably working his way into her heart. "I would have lost my husband," she whispered, "and I'm starting to think that would matter very much." James closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. "Emily, I want you to know something. When I proposed this arrangement, it was practical, necessary. But somewhere along the way—" He paused, searching for words. "Somewhere along the way, it became more. You became more. And I find myself wanting things I have no right to want." "What things?" Emily's heart was racing. "A real marriage, a real family, a wife who's mine not just on paper but in truth." His thumbs stroked her cheeks, wiping away tears she hadn't known she was crying. "But I won't pressure you. You've been through enough, and I won't add to your burden. If you want this to stay an arrangement, I'll respect that." Emily thought of Thomas, who'd promised her everything and given her nothing. She thought of the terror of being alone and pregnant in the desert. She thought of the last month with James and the children, building a life from broken pieces. And she thought of the man standing before her, steady, kind, honorable, a man who kept his promises, a man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing in return. "James," she said softly, placing her hands over his. I'm not ready for everything. Not yet. The baby, the memories, the fear, it's all too much. But I want to try. I want to see if we can build something real, together. The smile that broke across James's face was like sunrise after a long night. Together, he agreed. We'll take it slow. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, tender and chaste, a promise of patience and hope. Then he stepped back, giving her space, giving her time. Good night, Emily Calder, he said softly. Good night, James, she replied, his name on her lips feeling more natural than it ever had before. As Emily finally made her way to her small bedroom, she realized that the storm outside had passed, leaving the world washed clean and new. And maybe, just maybe, the storm inside her was passing too, leaving room for something she'd thought lost forever. Hope, trust, the possibility of love. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby's movements, and smiled. Your papa is a good man, she whispered to the child, and we're lucky to have him. Outside, the stars emerged from behind the clouds, and somewhere in the house, she heard James moving about, checking on the children, securing their home. Her home. Their home. And Emily Calder, who'd been abandoned at a stagecoach stop just 1 month ago, closed her eyes and slept peacefully for the first time in longer than she could remember. The journey was just beginning, but she was no longer alone. She had family, purpose, and the tentative beginnings of something that might one day become love. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, the world scrubbed clean by wind and rain. Emily woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of children's laughter drifting up from downstairs. For a moment she lay still, savoring the simple peace of it, the safety of a solid roof over her head, the warmth of a home that was becoming truly hers. But peace, Emily was learning, was a fragile thing on the frontier. She was helping Lila dress for the day, carefully braiding the little girl's blonde curls, when they heard the sound of a horse approaching at speed. Through the window, Emily saw a rider she didn't recognize dismounting near the barn where James was inspecting storm damage. Who's that? Lila asked, pressing her nose to the glass. I don't know, sweetheart. Probably just someone needing your papa's help with their own storm repairs. But something about the urgency of the rider's movements made Emily's stomach clench with unease. She finished Lila's braid quickly and sent her down to breakfast with David, then made her way outside, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name. James was standing rigid as stone, his face pale beneath his tan, listening to whatever the rider was saying. When he saw Emily approaching, he held up a hand to stop her, but she kept walking. What's happened? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. The rider, a young ranch hand from a neighboring property, touched his hat to her. Ma'am, sorry to bring bad news, but there's a man in town asking after Mrs. Parker. Says he's her husband. Come to fetch her home. The world tilted. Emily's hand went instinctively to her belly, as if to protect the baby from the words she'd just heard. That's not possible, she whispered. I'm afraid it is, ma'am. He's been at the saloon since yesterday, telling anyone who'll listen about his pregnant wife who ran off. Says he's tracked her all the way from New Mexico territory. James's jaw was set so tight Emily could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Thank you for the warning, Cooper. You can head back now. The young man nodded and rode off, leaving James and Emily standing in the morning sunshine that suddenly felt cold. He found me, Emily said, her voice hollow. Thomas found me. He has no claim on you, James said fiercely. You're my wife now, legally married. He can't touch you. Can't he? Emily's laugh was bitter. James, he's the baby's father. He's my legal husband. Our marriage was never dissolved. What we did, getting married when I was still bound to him, that might not even be legal. James grabbed her shoulders, gentle but firm, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. I don't care what the law says. I don't care what some coward who abandoned you thinks he's entitled to. You are Emily Calder. You are my wife, the mother of my children, and I will not let him take you. You don't understand, Emily said, tears streaming down her face. Men like Thomas, they don't care about love or family or what's right. They care about pride, about possession. I humiliated him by surviving without him, by finding a better life. He'll want to punish me for that. Then let him try. James's voice was hard as iron. He'll have to go through me first. From the house, Emily heard Lila calling for her, the child's voice bright and innocent, unaware of the threat descending on their fragile peace. She thought of David, just starting to trust her, to let her into his wounded heart. She thought of the baby growing inside her, innocent of its father's cruelty. I have to leave, Emily said suddenly, the decision crystallizing with painful clarity. I have to go before he comes here, before he brings his poison to your family. You and the children will be safer without me. No. James's grip tightened. Absolutely not. Running is what he expects, what he wants. It gives him power. We stand and fight, Emily, together. James, you don't know what he's capable of, and he doesn't know what I'm capable of when someone threatens my family. James's storm-gray eyes blazed with a protective fury Emily had never seen before. You are not facing him alone. Not now, not ever. Before Emily could respond, David appeared in the doorway, his young face creased with worry. Miss Emily? Papa? What's wrong? Why is Miss Emily crying? James released Emily and turned to his son, his expression softening but remaining serious. David, I need you to do something very important for me. Take your sister inside, and I want both of you to stay in the house until I say otherwise. Can you do that? David's eyes widened, but he nodded with the gravity of a child forced to grow up too fast. Yes, sir. Is there trouble? Nothing I can't handle, James assured him, but I need to know you'll keep Lila safe and calm. Can I count on you? Yes, Papa. David straightened his shoulders, taking on the responsibility like a too-heavy coat. I'll take care of her. After David had shepherded a protesting Lila back inside, James turned to Emily again. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to stay in the house with the children. I'm going to ride into town and have a conversation with your former husband. James, no. Emily. His voice was gentle but implacable. Trust me, please. Emily looked at this man who'd become her husband, her partner, her unexpected anchor in a storm-tossed life. She thought of all the times Thomas had made promises and broken them, of the lies and the abandonment. And then she thought of James, steady, honorable James, who'd kept every promise he'd ever made to her. All right, she whispered. I trust you. Relief flooded James's face. He pulled her close, mindful of her belly, and pressed a kiss to her temple. Whatever happens, remember this. You are mine, and I am yours. No piece of paper or legal technicality changes that. You belong here, with me and the children. This is your home. Emily nodded against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and soap and the clean smell of hard work. Then he was pulling away, striding toward the barn to saddle his horse, every line of his body radiating purpose and controlled fury. She watched him ride away, her heart in her throat, then slowly made her way back to the house where two frightened children waited for reassurance she didn't know how to give. Lila met her at the door, tears already streaming down her small face. Is Papa going away? Is he leaving us like Mama did? Emily knelt down, ignoring the protest of her aching back, and gathered the little girl into her arms. No, sweetheart. Your Papa will be back, I promise. He just has to take care of something in town. What kind of something? David asked, his voice tight with the effort of staying calm. Why won't you tell us what's happening? Emily looked at the boy's serious face, at the fear he was trying so hard to hide, and made a decision. These children deserved honesty, even if the truth was frightening. There's a man in town, she said carefully. A man from my past, from before I came here. He wants to take me away, but your Papa isn't going to let that happen. David's eyes widened. The man who left you at the Stagecoach stop? Your old husband? Yes. But you're married to Papa now. You're a Calder. That other man can't have you. The fierce protectiveness in David's voice, the absolute certainty that she belonged with them, made Emily's eyes burn with fresh tears. That's what your Papa is going to make sure he understands. What if he doesn't listen? Lila asked, her voice small and scared. What if he takes you anyway? Emily cupped the little girl's face in her hands. Then your Papa will bring me back. Because that's what family does. They fight for each other. They protect each other. And we're family now. All of us. Promise? Lila whispered. Emily thought of all the broken promises in her life, all the times words had meant nothing, but she also thought of James riding toward town to defend her honor, to protect their fragile family. She thought of the vows they'd made before God and witnesses, vows that had started as convenience and become something infinitely more precious. I promise, she said, and meant it with everything in her. The hours that followed were the longest of Emily's life. She tried to keep the children occupied with lessons and chores, with stories and songs, but the tension hung over the house like a physical thing. Every sound made them jump. Was it James returning, or was it Thomas come to claim her? By mid-afternoon, Emily's nerves were stretched to breaking. She was standing at the window watching the road with desperate intensity when Lila tugged at her skirt. "Miss Emily, the baby's coming soon, isn't it?" Emily looked down at the child, puzzled by the sudden change of subject. "Yes, sweetheart, in about 2 months. And when it comes, you'll be its mama, right?" "Yes." Lila's small face was scrunched up with the effort of working through something complex. "But you're also our mama now, so that means the baby will be our brother or sister, like Papa said." "That's right. And that makes us a real family, not just people living together, but a real family like Mama and Papa used to be." Emily's throat tightened. "Yes, Lila, we're a real family." The little girl nodded, satisfied. "Then that other man can't take you, because you can't take a mama away from her children. That would be wrong." Out of the mouths of babes, Emily thought. This 5-year-old child had cut through all the legal complications and social conventions to the simple truth. She was a mother now, and mothers didn't abandon their children. "You're absolutely right," Emily said, pulling Lila close. "And I'm not going anywhere." David, who'd been listening from his perch by the other window, spoke up. "Miss Emily, if that man tries to take you, we'll fight him, Lila and me. We won't let him." Emily's heart broke and mended in the same moment. These children, who'd known her for less than 2 months, were ready to fight for her. They'd claimed her as surely as she'd claimed them. "I hope it won't come to that," she said gently. "But thank you, David. It means more than you know." The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when they finally heard hoofbeats. Emily's heart leaped into her throat as she rushed to the window, the children close behind her. But it was James's familiar figure she saw riding up the path, alone, his face grim but determined. Emily was out the door before she could think, moving as fast as her pregnant body would allow. James dismounted and caught her as she stumbled into his arms, his embrace solid and reassuring. "It's done," he said quietly. "He's gone." Emily pulled back to look at his face, searching for injuries, for signs of violence. "What happened? What did you do?" James guided her back toward the house, one arm around her shoulders. "Let's get inside. I'll tell you everything." Once they were settled in the main room, the children pressed close to Emily on the sofa. James stood by the fireplace and recounted his confrontation with Thomas Parker. "I found him at the saloon, just like Cooper said. He was drunk, telling anyone who'd listen about his runaway wife." James's jaw tightened at the memory. "He saw me and knew immediately who I was. News travels fast in a small town. He started making demands saying you belonged to him, that the baby was his." "What did you say?" Emily asked, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. "I told him the truth. That you're my wife now, legally married by a circuit preacher. That the baby would carry my name and be raised as mine. That he had no claim on either of you." "And he just accepted that?" Emily couldn't hide her skepticism. Thomas had never backed down from anything in his life. "Not at first." James's expression darkened. "He got belligerent, started shouting about his rights, about taking you back by force if necessary. That's when the sheriff intervened." "The sheriff?" James nodded. "Tom Hastings. Good man. He was already aware of the situation. Apparently your Thomas had been making quite a spectacle of himself. Tom pulled me aside and I explained everything, showed him our marriage certificate, told him about finding you abandoned at the Stagecoach stop. And then? Then Tom had a very pointed conversation with Thomas Parker, explained that in the Arizona territory, a man who abandons his pregnant wife forfeits any legal claim to her or the child. Explained that you'd entered into a legal marriage with me, which superseded any previous arrangement, and explained that if Thomas continued to harass you or cause trouble, He'd find himself facing charges. Emily's legs felt weak with relief. So he's really gone? He left town on the afternoon stage, heading back to New Mexico. Tom made it very clear he wasn't welcome back. James crossed the room and knelt before Emily, taking her hands in his. Emily, I need you to understand something. The law is on our side, yes, but even if it wasn't, I would still protect you. I would still fight for you, because you're mine now in every way that matters, by building this life with us. I'm not going anywhere, Emily promised. This is my home. You're my family. Nothing and no one will change that. David, who'd been listening with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. Papa, does this mean Miss Emily is really ours forever? That other man can't come back and take her? That's exactly what it means, son. James ruffled David's hair. She's a Calder now, same as you and Lila and me. Forever. Lila launched herself at Emily with such force she nearly knocked her over. I'm so glad. I was so scared you'd have to go away. Emily held the little girl close, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Over Lila's blonde curls, she met James's eyes and saw her own emotions reflected back. Relief, gratitude, and the tentative beginning of something that looked remarkably like love. That evening, as Emily prepared dinner with a lightness in her step that had been absent all day, she realized something profound had shifted. The threat from Thomas hadn't destroyed their fragile family. It had strengthened it. It had forced them all to confront what they meant to each other, to declare their loyalties, to choose each other over the easier path of running away. James had fought for her. The children had claimed her. And she had chosen them all, freely and without reservation. As they sat down to dinner together, this family forged from necessity and tempered by trial, Emily looked around the table and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like she belonged. The days following Thomas's departure settled into a new rhythm, one marked by a deeper ease and comfort than before. Emily no longer felt like a guest or an employee. She felt like the mistress of the house, the mother of the family, the partner James treated her as in every interaction. The children noticed the change too. David's reserve finally crumbled completely one evening when Emily was helping him with his arithmetic. He'd been struggling with a particularly difficult problem, growing frustrated with himself. I'm stupid, he muttered, throwing down his slate. I'll never get this right. David called her. You are not stupid, Emily said firmly. You're learning, and learning is hard sometimes. Your brain is growing, just like your body. It needs time and practice. Mama used to say that, David said quietly. She'd say my brain was like a muscle that needed exercise. Emily's heart clenched at the mention of Catherine, but she kept her voice gentle. Your mama was right. She was a wise woman. David looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes so like James's, searching her face. Miss Emily, I know you're not my real mama, but sometimes you feel like you could be. Is that okay? Emily set down the slate and pulled David close, this boy who'd tried so hard to be strong, to be a man when he should have been allowed to be a child. Oh, sweetheart, it's more than okay. I would be honored to be your mama, in whatever way you need me to be. I still love my real mama, David said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. I don't want to forget her. And you won't. You can love her and love me too. Love doesn't run out, David. The more you give, the more you have. David pulled back, wiping his eyes. Papa said something like that once, about how loving Lila didn't make him love me less. Your papa is a smart man. He loves you, you know. The words were matter of fact, delivered with a child's simple honesty. He doesn't say it, but I can tell. He looks at you the way he used to look at Mama. Emily's breath caught. David, it's complicated. Your father and I, we married for practical reasons, but it's not practical anymore, is it? David's eyes were too knowing for his age. You love him too. I can tell. Emily opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because David was right. Somewhere between the stagecoach stop and this moment, somewhere between necessity and choice, she'd fallen in love with James Calder. It wasn't the wild, passionate love she'd thought she felt for Thomas. This was steadier, deeper, a love built on respect and partnership, on shared responsibilities and quiet moments, on watching him be a father to his children and knowing he'd be a father to hers as well. Yes, she admitted softly. I do love him. But David, that doesn't mean... It means we're a real family, David interrupted. Like I told Lila. Not just people living together, but people who chose each other. Emily hugged him close again, marveling at the wisdom children possessed. You're absolutely right. We chose each other. That night, after the children were in bed, Emily found James in the barn again, checking on the pregnant mare. He looked up when she entered, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. Shouldn't you be resting? He asked. It's been a long day. I needed to talk to you. Emily moved closer, her hands twisting nervously in her skirt. About us. About what we are to each other. James set down the brush he'd been using and gave her his full attention. All right? Emily took a deep breath, gathering her courage. When you proposed this arrangement, you said it was practical, a business transaction, and it was... I won't pretend otherwise, but James, it's not that anymore. Not for me, at least. What is it now? His voice was careful, controlled, but Emily could see the hope dawning in his eyes. It's real. This marriage, this family, you, all of it is real to me. And I need to know if it's real to you too, or if I'm fooling myself. James closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. Emily, it's been real to me for weeks now. I've been falling in love with you since the day you made pancakes for my children and gave David permission to be a child again. Since you braided Lila's hair and read her stories, since you turned my house back into a home. You love me? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I love you, James confirmed. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you've embraced my children as your own. I love waking up knowing you're in the house, and I dread the thought of ever losing you. Emily's tears fell freely now, but they were tears of joy. I love you too. I didn't mean to. I told myself this was just survival, just making the best of a bad situation. But you made it so easy to love you. James's thumb wiped away her tears. Catherine used to say that the best marriages start with friendship and grow into love. I didn't believe her. Ours started with love. But with you, I'm learning she was right. What we're building is stronger because it has a foundation. What happens now? Emily asked. We've been living as partners, but not as husband and wife, not in all the ways. James's eyes darkened with emotion, love, desire, and something else, reverence, perhaps. Now we take the next step. When you're ready, when the baby comes and you've recovered, I want this to be a real marriage in every sense, Emily, but only when you're ready. Emily thought of the baby growing inside her, of the birth that lay ahead, of the recovery that would follow. After the baby, when I've healed, then we'll truly be husband and wife. After the baby, James agreed. He leaned down and kissed her then, a real kiss this time, not chaste or perfunctory, but deep and meaningful, full of promise and patient desire. Emily melted into it, into him, tasting the future they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. I need to ask you something. The baby, Thomas's baby, can you love it? Can you raise it without resenting it for who its father was? Emily's hand moved to her belly, feeling the life within. This baby is innocent of its father's sins. And more than that, this baby brought me to you. If I hadn't been pregnant, if Thomas hadn't abandoned me, I would never have ended up at that stagecoach stop. I would never have met you. So yes, I can love this child. I already do. James's hand covered hers on her belly. Then this is our child, our son or daughter, no one else's. The baby kicked, as if in agreement, and they both laughed through their tears. The following weeks were perhaps the happiest of Emily's life. The tension that had existed between her and James dissolved, replaced by open affection and the easy intimacy of a couple truly in love. They didn't hide their feelings from the children. David and Lila deserved to see what a loving marriage looked like, to know that their family was built on solid ground. Lila took to calling Emily Mama without any prompting, the word slipping out naturally one morning and then becoming permanent. Emily's heart had nearly burst the first time she heard it. David was more reserved, still calling her Miss Emily, but the love was there in his actions, in the way he helped her with heavy tasks without being asked, in the way he read to her in the evenings when her back ached too much to stand, in the small wildflowers he picked for her and left on the kitchen table. James was attentive and caring, conscious of Emily's advancing pregnancy. He took over the heavier household tasks, insisted she rest more, and often could be found with his hand on her belly, talking to the baby as if it could hear him. "You're going to have the best mama in the world," he'd say to her stomach, "and a brother and sister who already love you. You're a lucky little one." Emily would stroke his hair and marvel at this man who'd so completely claimed another man's child as his own. This was what a father should be, not just someone who provided a genetic contribution, but someone who chose to love and protect and nurture. As her time drew closer, Emily began to prepare for the birth. She'd engaged the services of Mrs. Henderson, the midwife from town, and had worked with James to set up the room for the baby's arrival. They'd converted the small sewing room into a nursery, with a cradle James had built with his own hands and blankets Emily had stitched during the long afternoons. One evening, about a month before the baby was due, Emily was folding baby clothes, tiny garments that seemed impossibly small, when Lila climbed into her lap. "Mama, will you still love us after the baby comes?" the little girl asked, her blue eyes worried. Emily set aside the clothes and wrapped her arms around Lila. "Oh, sweetheart, of course I will. The baby will be your brother or sister, part of our family, but you and David are my children too. My first children. Nothing will ever change that." "Promise?" "I promise. You know what? I think having a baby will make you realize how much love I have for you. Because when I look at that tiny baby and feel all that love, I'll remember that I feel the same way about you and David, and it will make me grateful that I get to be your mama." Lila seemed satisfied with this answer. She snuggled closer, her hand patting Emily's belly. "I think it's a girl, and I think we should name her Hope." "Hope?" Emily repeated. "Why Hope?" "Because that's what you brought us. You gave us hope that we could be happy again after Mama died. So the baby should be named Hope, so we remember." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. We'll suggest it to your papa." That night, Emily told James about Lila's suggestion. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, his arm around her shoulders. "Hope," James repeated, testing the name. "It's fitting. You did bring us hope, Emily. You brought us back to life. If it's a girl, then. And if it's a boy?" James was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him Samuel, after my father. He was a good man, died when I was young, but he taught me what it meant to be honorable, to keep your word and protect those weaker than yourself." "Samuel," Emily said, trying it out. "Samuel Calder. I like it. Your father would be proud of you, James, of the man you've become, the father you are." "I hope so. I'm trying to teach David and Lila what he taught me. And I'll teach this new baby, too. Whether it's Hope or Samuel, they'll know what it means to be a Calder." Emily leaned into her husband's warmth, feeling safe and loved in a way she'd never imagined possible. The baby kicked, and James's hand immediately moved to feel it, his face lighting up with wonder as it did every time. "Strong one," he commented. "Going to give us a run for our money, I think." "Like father, like child," Emily teased. James laughed. "I'm not that bad. You're stubborn and protective and absolutely immovable when you've decided something is right. This baby, our baby, is going to be exactly the same." "Our baby," James repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "I never get tired of hearing you say that." Emily turned to look at him, at this man who'd saved her in so many ways. "James, do you ever regret it? Marrying me? Taking on another man's child?" "Never." His answer was immediate and absolute. "Emily, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You've given me back my family, given my children a mother, given me a partner I can count on. How could I regret that? Even though it started as just an arrangement? Even though we didn't love each other at first?" James pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. "Maybe that makes it better. We chose each other twice, once out of necessity and once out of love. That's a stronger foundation than most marriages have." Emily closed her eyes, breathing in the moment, the warmth of the setting sun, the solid presence of her husband, the life growing inside her, the sound of their children playing in the yard. This was peace. This was home. This was everything she'd ever wanted and more than she'd ever dreamed of having. "I love you, James Calder," she whispered. "And I love you, Emily Calder, forever." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Emily felt the baby kick again, stronger this time. Soon, very soon, their family would be complete. The child conceived in betrayal would be born into love, welcomed into a family that chose each other every day. Emily thought back to that day at the Stagecoach stop, to the moment when she'd thought her life was over. She'd been so wrong. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. Everything before had been preparation for this, for the family she'd found in the most unlikely of places. She'd been abandoned in the desert, but she'd been found by a cowboy with sad eyes and motherless children. She'd been offered a bargain and found love instead. She'd lost everything and gained more than she'd ever had. As James helped her to her feet, her pregnant belly making even simple movements challenging now, and guided her back into their home, Emily sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For James, for David and Lila, for the baby soon to be born, for second chances and unexpected blessings, for the miracle of being loved when she'd thought herself unlovable, of being chosen when she'd been discarded, of finding home when she'd been lost. The Calder Ranch, with its weathered buildings and wide Arizona skies, had become more than just a place to live. It had become the foundation of everything good in her life. And as Emily climbed into her narrow bed for one of the last nights before she and James would truly become husband and wife in every sense, she smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, motherhood, the continued building of their family, the hard work of ranch life. But Emily wasn't afraid anymore. She had James beside her, children who called her mama, and a future full of possibility. She'd been abandoned at a stagecoach stop, but that abandonment had led her exactly where she needed to be. Home. The baby came 3 weeks early, on a hot June morning when the Arizona sun was just beginning to climb over the eastern mesa. Emily had been hanging laundry on the line, humming softly to herself, when the first pain struck, sharp and unmistakable, radiating from her lower back around to her belly, with an intensity that stole her breath. She gripped the clothesline, her knuckles white, and waited for the contraction to pass. When it did, she straightened slowly, her hand moving to her stomach. This was it. After months of waiting, of preparing, of wondering, the baby was coming. "Leela," she called, keeping her voice as calm as possible. "Go fetch your papa from the south pasture. Tell him it's time." The little girl looked up from where she'd been playing with her doll in the shade. "Time for what, Mama?" "Time for the baby, sweetheart. Go quickly now, but be careful." Lila's eyes went wide with excitement and fear, but she dropped her doll and ran toward the pasture where James and David were mending fence. Emily watched her go, then made her way slowly back to the house, pausing twice more as contractions gripped her body. She'd just made it inside when James came thundering up on horseback, David clinging behind him and Lila running to keep up. He was off the horse before it had fully stopped, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. "Emily!" He burst through the door to find her leaning against the kitchen table, breathing through another contraction. "How long? How far apart are they?" "About 10 minutes," Emily managed. "But they're strong, James. Stronger than I expected this early." James's face paled slightly, but his voice remained steady. "David, ride to town and fetch Mrs. Henderson. Tell her the baby's coming and to get here as fast as she can. Lila, you go with your brother. You can stay with the Johnsons until this is over." "But Papa, I want to stay and meet the baby," Lila protested. "You will, sweetheart, but later. This isn't something for little girls to see." James was already guiding Emily toward the bedroom, his arms strong around her waist. David, showing the maturity that constantly surprised Emily, was already helping Lila onto the horse. "Come on, Lila. The faster we go, the faster we get to come back and meet your new brother or sister." As the children rode off, James settled Emily onto the bed they'd prepared for this moment. Fresh sheets, clean towels, everything Mrs. Henderson had instructed them to have ready. But as another contraction gripped her, harder and longer than the previous ones, Emily felt the first flutter of real fear. "It's too fast," she gasped when she could speak again. "With first babies, it's supposed to take hours. James, something's wrong." "Nothing's wrong," James said firmly, though she could see the worry in his eyes. Every baby is different. Mrs. Henderson will be here soon, and she'll know what to do." But even as he spoke, Emily felt a rush of fluid and knew with certainty that the baby wasn't going to wait for the midwife. This child, their child, was coming now, ready or not. "James," she gritted out, gripping his hand so hard she knew it must hurt. "The baby's coming. Now. You're going to have to deliver it." She watched the panic flash across his face, quickly replaced by determination. This was James Calder, the man who'd faced down storms and droughts and her vengeful ex-husband without flinching. He could do this. He had to. "Tell me what to do," he said, already rolling up his sleeves. Emily tried to remember everything she'd heard from other women, all the birth stories shared in whispers. "You need to wash your hands, get clean towels. When the baby comes, you need to support the head, let the body follow naturally. The cord, you'll need to tie it off in 2 places and cut between them." James moved with swift efficiency, following her instructions, and when the next contraction came, impossibly stronger than the last, Emily bore down with every ounce of strength she possessed. Time became meaningless, measured only in waves of pain and brief moments of respite. Emily heard herself making sounds she'd never made before, primal and raw. James's voice was a constant anchor, steady and encouraging, telling her she was strong, she was brave, she could do this. "I can see the head," James said, his voice tight with emotion. "Emily, the baby's crowning. Just a little more, love. Just a little more." Emily gathered everything she had left and pushed with a strength born of desperation and determination. She felt the burn, the impossible stretch, and then suddenly, blessedly, the pressure released. "The head's out," James's voice was shaking now. "One more push, Emily. One more for the shoulders." Emily pushed again, and then she heard it, the most beautiful sound in the world. A baby's cry, loud and indignant, filling the room with life and promise. "It's a girl," James said, his voice breaking completely. "Emily, we have a daughter." Through the haze of exhaustion and overwhelming emotion, Emily watched as James wrapped their daughter. Hope, she thought, her name is Hope, in a clean towel and carefully tied off the cord. His hands were shaking, but they were gentle, reverent, as he completed the tasks she'd taught him. Then he was placing the baby in Emily's arms, this tiny, perfect creature with a cap of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right into her soul. Emily's tears fell freely as she cradled her daughter, counting fingers and toes, marveling at the miracle of her. "She's perfect," Emily whispered. "James, she's absolutely perfect." James sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Emily, his other hand gently stroking the baby's cheek. "She's beautiful, just like her mother." They sat like that, frozen in wonder, until the sound of approaching horses broke the spell. Mrs. Henderson arrived in a flurry of efficiency, followed closely by David and Lila. The midwife took one look at the scene, Emily exhausted but glowing, the baby cleaned and wrapped, James looking shell-shocked, and laughed. "Well, I see you didn't need me after all," she said, moving to examine Emily and the baby. "Looks like you did just fine on your own." While Mrs. Henderson checked them over, declaring both mother and baby healthy despite the rapid delivery, David and Lila crept closer to the bed, their eyes wide with wonder. "Is that our sister?" Lila whispered, as if afraid speaking too loud might break something precious. "It is," Emily confirmed, adjusting the blanket so they could see the baby's face. "This is Hope, your baby sister." "Hope," David repeated, a smile breaking across his serious young face. "That's a good name, a really good name." Lila reached out tentatively, and Emily guided her small hand to touch the baby's fingers. Hope's tiny fist immediately closed around Lila's finger, and the little girl gasped with delight. "She's holding me! Mama, she's holding my finger!" "She knows you're her big sister," Emily said softly. "She's saying hello." James pulled David close with his free arm. "What do you think, son? Ready to be a big brother?" David nodded solemnly. "I'll teach her everything, how to ride, how to rope, everything she needs to know about the ranch." "She'll be lucky to have you," James said, and Emily could hear the pride and love in his voice. Mrs. Henderson finished her examination and stood, gathering her supplies. "Everything looks good. Emily, you'll need rest, lots of it. James, you'll have to manage the household for a few weeks while she recovers. Can you handle that?" "I can handle anything," James said, looking at his wife and children with an expression of such complete contentment that Emily's heart swelled. "I have everything I need right here." After Mrs. Henderson left with instructions to send for her if there were any problems, and after David and Lila had been persuaded to let Emily rest, Emily found herself alone with James and their daughter. Hope had nursed and fallen asleep, her tiny face peaceful in that way only babies could achieve. "I was terrified," James admitted quietly, sitting beside Emily again. "When I realized I'd have to deliver her, I thought I'd fail you. Fail both of you." Emily reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You didn't fail. You were perfect. James, you brought our daughter into the world. There's no greater gift you could have given me." "Our daughter," James repeated, wonder in his voice. "I know she's not mine by blood, but Emily, when she looked at me, she is yours," Emily interrupted firmly. "By choice, by love, by every single way that matters. You're her father, James. Her real father, the only one she'll ever know." James leaned down and kissed her, gentle and tender, then pressed his lips to Hope's forehead. "I love you both so much. You and David and Lila and this perfect little one. My family, my whole world." Emily closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her, but she fought it for just a moment longer. "James, thank you." "For what?" "For finding me at that stagecoach stop, for offering me hope when I had none, for giving me this life, this family, for loving me when I thought I was unlovable." James's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Emily called her, "You are the easiest person in the world to love. Now sleep. I'll watch over you both." As Emily drifted off, Hope safe in her arms and James's hand warm in hers, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From abandonment to belonging, from despair to joy, from broken to whole. Thomas Parker had left her at a stagecoach stop, thinking he was discarding a burden. Instead, he'd set her on a path to everything she'd ever wanted. The irony wasn't lost on her, and as sleep claimed her, Emily smiled. The days following Hope's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Emily recovered quickly, her body resilient despite the rapid labor, and found herself settling into the rhythm of caring for a newborn while managing a household and 2 other children. James was a revelation. He rose with her during the night feedings, changing Hope's diapers and walking her when she fussed, singing to her in his deep, rumbling voice until she settled. He took over the cooking without complaint, managing to produce edible if unexciting meals, and he made sure David and Lila didn't feel neglected in the flurry of attention the baby required. "Papa's better at baby stuff than Mama was," Lila confided to Emily one afternoon while they were watching James expertly swaddle Hope. "Mama used to get frustrated when we cried." Emily felt a pang for Catherine, understanding how difficult it must have been for her to manage 2 children alone while James worked the ranch. "Your mama did her best, sweetheart. Being a parent is hard work." "But you and Papa make it look easy," Lila said, "like you were always meant to be together." Emily pulled the little girl close. "Maybe we were. Maybe everything that happened, all the hard things, was leading us to each other." It was David who surprised her most. The 8-year-old took his role as big brother seriously, but with a gentleness that belied his years. He'd appear at Emily's side without being asked, holding Hope so Emily could eat or wash or simply rest for a few minutes. He read to the baby from his schoolbooks, his young voice solemn as he explained arithmetic and spelling to an infant who simply blinked at him with unfocused eyes. "Do you think she understands?" David asked one evening, looking up from the book he'd been reading aloud. "She understands that her big brother loves her," Emily assured him. "That's all that matters right now." David nodded, satisfied, and went back to reading, one finger gently stroking Hope's tiny hand. 3 weeks after Hope's birth, Emily woke in the early morning darkness to find James sitting in the rocking chair beside their bed, Hope cradled against his chest, both of them fast asleep. The sight made her throat tight with emotion. This man, this good, honorable, loving man, had claimed another man's child as completely as if she'd been born from his own body. She must have made a sound because James's eyes opened, immediately alert. "Did we wake you?" "No," Emily whispered. "I just woke up. What are you doing?" She was fussing, didn't want to disturb you, so I brought her in here." He looked down at the sleeping baby, his expression soft. "She settles when I hold her. Makes me feel useful." Emily slipped out of bed and crossed to them, running her hand through James's hair. "You are useful. You're everything, James, to all of us." He looked up at her, and in the dim pre-dawn light, she saw something shift in his expression. It had been 6 weeks now since Hope's birth. 6 weeks of recovery and adjustment, and Emily growing stronger every day. 6 weeks of this marriage being real in every way except one. "Emily," James said quietly, his voice rough, Has enough time passed? Are you healed?" Emily's heart began to race. She knew what he was asking, knew that Mrs. Henderson had declared her fully recovered at last week's visit, knew that she and James had been dancing around this moment, both wanting it, but neither quite ready to take the step. "Yes," she said softly, "I'm healed. James, I'm ready. For everything. For our marriage to be complete." James stood carefully, settling Hope in her cradle beside the bed, then turned to Emily. The look in his eyes, love and desire and reverence all mixed together, made her breath catch. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Because, Emily, once we do this, there's no going back. This becomes real in every possible way." "It's already real," Emily said, rising on her toes to meet him. "This is just the final piece, the piece we've been waiting for." James kissed her then, not the chaste kisses they'd shared before, but deep and passionate, full of months of restrained desire and overwhelming love. Emily melted into him, into the promise of what this night would bring, of the complete union they were about to achieve. He lifted her gently, mindful of her still recovering body, and carried her to the bed. As he laid her down, his eyes never left hers. "I love you," Emily called her. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, James. Always." What followed was tender and careful, James constantly checking that she was comfortable, that nothing hurt, that this was what she wanted. And Emily, who'd only ever known the rushed, selfish coupling of her first marriage, discovered what it meant to be truly loved, to be cherished and worshipped and treated like something precious. When it was over, when they lay tangled together in the early morning light with Hope sleeping peacefully beside them, Emily felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. This marriage, which had started as a desperate bargain, had become the foundation of everything good in her life. "No regrets?" James asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Not a single one," Emily assured him. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be. With you." James pulled her closer, and they lay like that until Hope's hungry cries demanded their attention. As James watched Emily nurse their daughter, his hand resting possessively on her hip, Emily knew with absolute certainty that she'd found her forever. The weeks turned into months, and the Calder Ranch thrived under the care of its completed family. Hope grew from a tiny infant into a chubby baby with James's gray eyes and Emily's dark hair, equally beloved by her parents and siblings. David and Lila doted on her, competing for her smiles and her attention. Emily had never been happier. The hard work of ranch life, the sleepless nights with the baby, the constant demands of 3 children, none of it diminished her joy. She woke each morning beside James, grateful for another day of this life she'd built from the ruins of her first marriage. But happiness, Emily was learning, made you vulnerable in ways despair never could. When you had something precious, you had something to lose. The threat came on an ordinary Tuesday in late autumn. Emily was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough while Hope napped in her cradle and the older children did their lessons at the table when she heard horses approaching. Not unusual, the ranch had visitors regularly, neighbors dropping by or ranch hands returning from errands. But something made Emily wipe her hands on her apron and move to the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. Thomas Parker sat astride a fine horse, looking prosperous in new clothes and a fancy hat. And he wasn't alone. Beside him rode a man wearing a badge, a marshal, from the look of him. Emily's hands went to her throat, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. He'd come back. Thomas had come back, and this time he'd brought the law with him. "David," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded despite the terror flooding through her. Take Lila and Hope to your room. Stay there until I come for you, no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" David's eyes went wide, but he didn't argue. He gathered Lila, who started to protest until she saw Emily's face, and carefully lifted Hope from her cradle, hurrying them all upstairs. Emily stood in the kitchen, her hands clenched into fists, and waited. She heard the knock on the door, heavy and official. She walked to it slowly, giving herself time to gather her courage, then opened it. Thomas stood there, a smug smile on his face that made Emily's stomach turn. The marshal beside him looked uncomfortable, his weathered face creased with uncertainty. "Hello, Emily," Thomas said, as if he hadn't abandoned her pregnant and penniless in the desert. "You're looking well. Motherhood agrees with you." "What do you want, Thomas?" Emily's voice was ice. "What's mine?" Thomas said simply. "My wife. My child. Marshal Hawkins here has been kind enough to help me understand my legal rights in this matter." The marshal shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I'm Marshal David Hawkins out of New Mexico Territory. Mr. Parker here has filed a complaint, says you're his legal wife and that you've committed bigamy by marrying another man. Says you've stolen his child." Emily's mind raced. Bigamy. Of course, their marriage to James might not be legal if her marriage to Thomas had never been dissolved. And if it wasn't legal, she had no protection, no claim to the Calder name or the family she'd built. "My marriage to Thomas Parker ended when he abandoned me at a stagecoach stop," Emily said clearly. "He left me pregnant and destitute, with nothing but a note saying to forget him and start over. I have witnesses, the station keeper, the man who found me there. Thomas Parker forfeited any rights to me or my child when he rode away." "That's not how the law sees it, I'm afraid," the marshal said, though he sounded genuinely regretful. "A man can't abandon his legal wife. Not officially, not in a way that dissolves the marriage. And if you married Mr. Calder while still bound to Mr. Parker, well, that's bigamy, a serious crime." "She's my wife," Thomas said, reaching for Emily's arm. "And I'm taking her home." Emily jerked away from his touch. "I will never go anywhere with you. You gave up any claim to me when you left me to die in the desert." "I didn't leave you to die," Thomas said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "I left you at a station where you could catch the stage. I was going to send for you once I got established in the silver mines. You're the one who ran off and married another man." The lies were so outrageous, Emily could barely form words to respond. But before she could try, she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. James, riding in from the north pasture, alerted by one of the ranch hands who must have seen the strangers arrive. He was off his horse before it had fully stopped, striding toward the house with fury written in every line of his body. "Get off my property!" he growled at Thomas. "Your property?" Thomas laughed. "I don't think so. This is my wife, which makes her my property, and I'm well within my rights to take her." James looked at the marshal. "This man abandoned her, left her pregnant at a stagecoach stop with nothing. I have witnesses. I have the note he left. He has no claim on her." Marshal Hawkins sighed heavily. "Mr. Calder, I sympathize, I do. But the law is clear. They were married legal, and unless there's been a divorce or an annulment, they still are. Which means your marriage to Mrs. Parker, if that's even her legal name, isn't valid." Emily saw the color drain from James's face as the full implications hit him. If their marriage wasn't legal, he had no right to her, no right to keep her. She could be taken away, and there would be nothing he could do about it. "There has to be something," James said, his voice desperate now. "You can't just let him take her. She doesn't want to go. Doesn't that matter?" "I'm afraid it doesn't," the marshal said. "A wife's place is with her husband, regardless of her personal feelings. Now, Mrs. Parker, if you'll come with us—" "No." Emily's voice rang out clear and strong. "I won't go. You'll have to drag me, and I'll fight you every step of the way." Thomas's face darkened with anger. "Emily, don't make this harder than it has to be. You're my wife. Our child is my child. You belong with me." "That child isn't yours," Emily said fiercely. "You abandoned her before she was born. James Calder is her father in every way that matters." "The law doesn't see it that way," Thomas countered. "Legally, she's mine, and I want what's mine." James moved to stand beside Emily, his hand finding hers. "You'll have to go through me first." The marshal put his hand on his gun, not drawing it but making his position clear. "Mr. Calder, I don't want trouble, but I will enforce the law if I have to." They stood there, locked in a terrible tableau. Thomas smug and vindictive, the marshal uncomfortable but determined, James and Emily united in desperate defiance. Emily's mind raced, searching for a solution, for any way out of this nightmare. And then, from the house behind them, came a small voice. "You're not taking our mama." They all turned to see David standing in the doorway, Lila beside him and Hope in his arms. The boy's face was set with determination beyond his years. "She's our mama now," David continued, walking toward them with careful steps, protecting the baby in his arms. "She takes care of us, loves us, makes our house a home. You can't take her away from us." "Boy, this doesn't concern you," Thomas said dismissively. "It concerns all of us," David shot back. "This is our family, and families protect each other." Lila moved to stand beside her brother, her small chin raised defiantly. "If you take Mama Emily, you have to take us too, because we won't stay here without her." Emily's heart broke and mended in the same moment. These children, her children, were willing to give up everything to stay with her. James's hand tightened on hers, and when she looked at him, she saw tears streaming down his weathered face. "You heard them, Marshal. This woman is the mother of my children. She's the heart of this family. You take her, you destroy 4 lives, not just one." Marshal Hawkins looked deeply uncomfortable now, his gaze moving from the determined children to Emily's tear-stained face to James's anguish. "Mr. Parker, maybe we should reconsider." "No," Thomas said flatly. "The law is the law. She's my wife, and I want her back." "Why?" Emily asked suddenly, the question bursting from her. "Why do you want me, Thomas? You left me. You said you didn't want this life, didn't want the responsibility. What changed?" Thomas's face twisted with something ugly. "What changed is I found out you landed on your feet, married a rancher, got yourself a nice, comfortable life. Well, if there's comfort and security to be had, it should be mine. You're my wife, and I have a right to what you've built." The truth of it hung in the air. He didn't want Emily or even the baby. He wanted the life she'd created, the security and stability of the Calder Ranch. It was greed, pure and simple, and vindictive pride. James made a sound like a wounded animal. "You bastard! This isn't about her at all. It's about money. Call it what you want," Thomas shrugged. "Doesn't change the facts. She's mine by law, and I'm taking her." The marshal looked sick now, clearly regretting his part in this, but he moved toward Emily nonetheless. "Ma'am, please, don't make this harder." Emily looked at James, at the children, at the life she'd built from nothing. She thought about Hope, who would grow up without knowing this family who loved her. She thought about David and Lila, losing another mother. She thought about James, who'd given her everything and was about to lose it all. And she made her decision. "Marshal Hawkins," she said clearly, "I will go with you, but not with Thomas. I want to go before a judge, have this matter properly adjudicated. If the law truly says I belong to a man who abandoned me, then let a judge say it. Let him look these children in the eye and tell them they're losing their mother to satisfy a legal technicality and one man's greed." The marshal looked relieved to have any option besides forcing her. "That's reasonable. There's a circuit judge due in town next week. We can wait for him." "No," Thomas protested. "I want her now." "Mr. Parker," the marshal said, his patience clearly wearing thin, "the lady is asking for due process. That's her right. She'll stay in town, in my custody, until the judge arrives. That's the best I can offer you." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but the marshal's hand was still on his gun, and his expression brooked no argument. "Fine," he spat. 1 week. But then she's mine." Emily turned to James, and the devastation on his face nearly broke her. "I have to go," she whispered. "But James, this isn't over. We'll fight this. We'll find a way." James pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'll get the best lawyer in the territory. I'll mortgage the ranch if I have to. Emily, I won't lose you. I can't." "You won't," Emily promised, though she had no idea if she could keep that promise. "I'll come back to you, to all of you." She kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it, all her love, all her fear, all her desperate hope that somehow, impossibly, they would find a way through this. Then she turned to the children. David stood there holding Hope, Lila clinging to his side, both of them crying. Emily knelt before them, gathering them close. "I love you," she told them fiercely. "All of you. You are my children, my family, my heart, and I will fight with everything I have to come back to you." "Promise?" Lila sobbed. "I promise," Emily said, knowing she might be making a promise she couldn't keep but unable to do anything else. She took Hope from David's arms, holding her daughter one last time, breathing in her baby smell, memorizing the weight of her. "Your papa will take care of you," she whispered, "and I will move heaven and earth to get back to you." Then, with strength she didn't know she possessed, Emily handed Hope back to David and stood. She walked to the marshal's horse without looking back, knowing that if she saw her family one more time, she wouldn't have the strength to leave. As she rode away from the Calder Ranch, from James and David and Lila and Hope, from the life she'd built and the love she'd found, Emily allowed herself one moment of despair. Then she straightened her spine and lifted her chin. This wasn't over. Thomas might have the law on his side, but she had something stronger. She had love. She had a family worth fighting for. And she would fight, with every breath in her body, to get back to them. The Calder Ranch disappeared behind her, but Emily's resolve only grew stronger. She'd been abandoned once and had survived. She'd been broken and had healed. And now, when everything hung in the balance, she would prove that love was stronger than law, that choice mattered more than obligation. She would find a way back to her family. She had to. The week Emily spent in the town jail was the longest of her life. Marshal Hawkins had been kind enough, giving her a clean cell and allowing her books and writing materials. But the bars were still bars, and the separation from her family was a physical ache that never subsided. James came every day, arriving at first light and staying until the marshal made him leave at dusk. He brought news of the children. Hope was fussy without Emily. Lila cried herself to sleep each night. David had grown silent and withdrawn. Each report was a knife to Emily's heart, but she treasured every word because it meant they still existed, still waited for her. On the third day, James arrived with a tall, distinguished man in a fine suit. "Emily, this is Harrison Blake. He's the best lawyer in 3 territories, and he's agreed to take our case." Mr. Blake studied Emily through sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Calder, or should I say Mrs. Parker? That's part of our problem right there, isn't it?" "I'm Emily Calder," she said firmly. "Whatever the law says, that's who I am." "Tell me everything," Blake said, settling into the chair across from her cell. "From the moment you met Thomas Parker to today. Leave nothing out." Emily recounted it all, her whirlwind courtship with Thomas, their marriage, the journey west, his growing distance and cruelty, the abandonment at the stagecoach stop. She showed him the note Thomas had left, which James had kept as evidence. She described meeting James, their arrangement, how it had grown into love. Blake listened intently, occasionally making notes. When she finished, he sat back with a thoughtful expression. "It's complicated. The law is clear that abandonment doesn't dissolve a marriage. But there are precedents, cases where a second marriage was upheld despite the existence of a first one, particularly when the first spouse was believed dead or had demonstrated clear intent to dissolve the union." "Can you win?" James asked, his voice rough with desperate hope. "I can make a compelling argument," Blake said carefully. "But I won't lie to you. The law favors Mr. Parker. He's the legal husband, and unless we can prove fraud, coercion, or his unfitness, the judge will likely rule in his favor." Emily felt her hope crumbling. "So there's nothing we can do?" "I didn't say that." Blake's eyes gleamed with something that might have been determination. "The law may favor him, but judges are human. They can be swayed by the right arguments, the right evidence. We need to show that Thomas Parker forfeited his rights through his actions, that your marriage to James Calder should be upheld on moral, if not strictly legal grounds." "How?" Emily asked. "By telling your story. By making the judge see you not as a legal problem, but as a woman, a mother, a person whose life and happiness hang in the balance. And by exposing Thomas Parker for exactly what he is, a greedy, vindictive man who doesn't want you, but wants to punish you for surviving his abandonment." Over the next few days, Blake interviewed everyone he could find: the station keeper Hoskins, who'd witnessed Emily's abandonment, the ranch hand Cooper, who'd brought news of Thomas's return, Mrs. Henderson, the midwife, who could testify to Emily's character. He even tracked down the circuit preacher who'd married Emily and James, getting his sworn statement that both parties had entered into the marriage in good faith. Thomas, meanwhile, was staying at the town's hotel, drinking heavily and bragging to anyone who would listen about how he was taking back what was his. His behavior won him no friends, but as Blake grimly noted, being unlikable wasn't illegal. On the 6th day, James arrived looking haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. When the marshal stepped away to give them privacy, James gripped the bars of Emily's cell with white-knuckled hands. "I can't lose you," he said, his voice breaking. "Emily, if the judge rules against us, I don't know what I'll do. The children are falling apart. Hope won't stop crying. She knows you're gone." Emily pressed her hands over his, wishing she could hold him properly, comfort him the way he'd comforted her so many times. "James, listen to me. Whatever happens tomorrow, know this. Loving you, being your wife, being a mother to your children, it's been the greatest gift of my life. If I have to go with Thomas, he can take my body, but he can't take my heart. That belongs to you, always." "Don't," James said roughly. "Don't talk like it's already over. We still have a chance. Blake says the law is against us," Emily interrupted gently. "I heard him, James. I know what we're facing, and I need you to promise me something. Anything. If I lose, if the judge sends me away with Thomas, you have to let me go. Don't do anything foolish. Don't get yourself arrested or worse trying to fight it. The children need you. Hope needs her father. Hope needs her mother," James countered fiercely. "They all do. Then fight for me in the courtroom tomorrow. Fight with everything you have. But if we lose, promise me you'll let me go without violence, without doing something that would destroy you and leave the children orphaned." James closed his eyes, his face a mask of agony. "I can't promise that." "You have to, for David and Lila and Hope. James, please." Finally, reluctantly, he nodded. "I promise. But Emily, I'm also promising you this. If that judge sends you away with Thomas, I will spend every day of the rest of my life finding a legal way to get you back. I will never stop fighting for you. Never." That night, Emily lay on the narrow cot in her cell and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. Not for herself, but for her children. For James. For the family she'd found in the most unexpected of places. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold. Marshal Hawkins brought Emily a clean dress, sent by James, and allowed her time to make herself presentable. As she dressed, her hands shook with nervousness and fear. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread through the small town, and it seemed everyone wanted to witness the drama. Emily saw familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson, the shopkeeper where she bought supplies, ranch hands from neighboring properties. And there, in the front row, sat James with David beside him. Lila had been left at home with Hope, deemed too young for the proceedings. Thomas sat on the opposite side with his lawyer, a slick-looking man named Peterson who'd ridden in from Santa Fe. Thomas looked smug and confident, already certain of his victory. Judge Walter Morrison entered, a white-haired man with a stern face and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to the truth. He surveyed the courtroom with evident distaste, then rapped his gavel. "This is a hearing to determine the legal status of Emily Parker, also known as Emily Calder, and to adjudicate the competing claims of Thomas Parker and James Calder. Mr. Peterson, you may present your case." Thomas's lawyer stood, smoothing his jacket. "Your Honor, the facts of this case are simple and clear. Thomas Parker and Emily Parker were legally married in Missouri 3 years ago. That marriage was never dissolved by divorce or annulment. Therefore, when Mrs. Parker married James Calder, she committed bigamy. Her second marriage is invalid, and she must return to her legal husband." "Mr. Blake?" the judge prompted. Harrison Blake rose with quiet dignity. "Your Honor, while the facts Mr. Peterson presents are technically accurate, they fail to capture the truth of this situation. Yes, Thomas and Emily Parker were married, but Mr. Parker abandoned his pregnant wife in the Arizona desert with no means of support, no money, and a note telling her to forget him and start over. He demonstrated clear intent to dissolve the marriage through his actions." "Intent isn't the same as legal dissolution," Judge Morrison observed. "No, Your Honor, but it speaks to Mr. Parker's character and his true motivations. This man doesn't want his wife back out of love or duty. He wants to punish her for surviving his abandonment, for building a better life without him. And in doing so, he would destroy not just Mrs. Calder, but 3 innocent children who have come to depend on her as their mother. Judge Morrison leaned forward. You're asking me to set aside the law based on emotional appeals? I'm asking you to interpret the law with wisdom and compassion, Blake said. To consider not just the letter, but the spirit. To recognize that while Mr. Parker may have a legal claim, he has no moral one. The judge sat back, his expression unreadable. I'll hear testimony. Mr. Peterson, call your first witness. Thomas took the stand, swearing to tell the truth with a hand on the Bible. His lawyer led him through a carefully constructed narrative. He'd left Emily at the Stagecoach stop because they'd had a disagreement, intending to return for her once he'd cooled down. He'd been delayed in the mines, unable to get back to her. He'd searched for her for months, only to discover she'd married another man. It was all lies, smooth and plausible, and Emily watched the judge's face, trying to gauge whether he believed them. Then Blake stood to cross-examine, and Emily saw why James had hired him. Mr. Parker, you say you intended to return for your wife, yet you took all your money, all your belongings, and left her with nothing. Is that correct? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. I needed those things for the mines. And your wife needed nothing. A pregnant woman needed no money, no food, no means of survival? I assumed she could catch the stage. With what money? Blake's voice sharpened. You left her with 17 cents. The stage fare was $3. How exactly was she supposed to catch the stage? Thomas's jaw tightened. I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. No, you weren't thinking of her at all, were you? In fact, you wrote her a note telling her to forget you and start over. Those aren't the words of a man intending to return. Those are the words of a man ending a relationship. I was upset. You were abandoning your wife, Blake said flatly, and you only returned when you learned she'd found security and comfort with another man. Isn't that the truth? That's not... I have rights to my wife and child. Ah, yes, the child. Tell me, Mr. Parker, how old is your daughter? Thomas blinked, caught off guard. I don't know exactly. She's 5 months old, born in June. And in those 5 months, how many times have you attempted to see her? I only just found out where Emily was. That's not what I asked. Since arriving in this town a week ago, knowing your daughter was at the Calder Ranch just 15 miles away, how many times have you ridden out to see her? Thomas's face flushed. I've been busy with legal matters. Too busy to meet your own daughter, too busy to hold her, to check on her welfare? Mr. Parker, you claim to want your wife and child, but you haven't shown the slightest interest in actually being a father or husband. You've shown interest in one thing only, asserting your legal rights to punish a woman who dared to survive without you. Objection, Peterson shouted. Counsel is badgering the witness. Overruled, Judge Morrison said, his eyes on Thomas. I want to hear Mr. Parker's answer. Thomas squirmed in his seat. I want what's legally mine, that's all. What's legally yours, Blake repeated. Not who you love, not who you've cared for, but what you own. Thank you, Mr. Parker. No further questions. As Thomas stepped down, Emily saw the judge make a note, his expression thoughtful. Hope flickered in her chest, fragile but present. Blake called his witnesses next. Hoskins testified to finding Emily abandoned, desperate, and penniless. The ranch hand Cooper described Thomas's boasting at the saloon, his obvious greed rather than concern for his wife. Mrs. Henderson spoke eloquently about Emily's character, her devotion to the Calder children, her excellence as a mother. Then Blake called James to the stand. Emily watched her husband, her real husband, regardless of what the law said, take the oath. His hand trembled slightly on the Bible, but his voice was steady. Mr. Calder, Blake began, tell the court how you met Emily Parker. James recounted that day at the Stagecoach stop, his voice growing rough with emotion as he described Emily's condition, her desperation, his practical proposal. And when you proposed marriage, what did you expect from it? I expected a mother for my children, James said honestly. Someone to run the household, to provide the care and nurturing they'd lost when their mother died. I didn't expect love. I didn't think I deserved it after Catherine. But love came anyway? James's eyes found Emily's across the courtroom. It did, slowly, carefully, but completely. Emily didn't just care for my children, she loved them as her own. She turned our house back into a home. She gave me a reason to hope again, to believe in the future. And when her daughter was born, I held that baby and knew with absolute certainty that she was mine, not by blood, but by choice, by love, by every single thing that makes a man a father. Tell the court about hope, Blake prompted. About the day she was born. James's voice broke as he described delivering hope himself, the terror and wonder of bringing his daughter into the world. I was the first person to hold her, the first to hear her cry. I cut her cord, wrapped her in blankets, placed her in her mother's arms. How can anyone say I'm not her father? How can the law say that biology matters more than that? In the gallery, Emily saw people wiping their eyes. Even the judge's stern expression had softened slightly. What would it do to your family if Emily were taken away? Blake asked. It would destroy us, James said simply. My children have already lost one mother. Losing another would break them. Hope wouldn't understand where her mother had gone. Lila would stop trusting that people stay. David would close himself off completely, convinced that loving anyone leads only to loss. His voice dropped to a whisper. And I would lose the woman I love, the partner I need, the wife I chose, and who chose me. We would all lose everything that matters. Blake let that sit for a moment, then said, No further questions. Peterson stood for cross-examination, but he seemed to realize the damage was done. His questions were perfunctory, and he sat down quickly. Finally, Blake called Emily herself. She took the stand on shaking legs, her hand trembling on the Bible as she swore to tell the truth. Blake led her through her story, the marriage to Thomas, the journey west, the growing realization that he didn't love her, the abandonment. Why did you marry James Calder? Blake asked. Because I was desperate, Emily said honestly. Because I was pregnant and alone and facing a future I couldn't survive. He offered me safety, security, a home for my baby. I married him because I had no other choice. And now? If you had other choices, would you still choose James Calder? Emily looked at James, at this man who'd saved her in every way possible. Every single time. James gave me a practical arrangement and then proceeded to give me everything I'd ever dreamed of. He gave me respect, partnership, love. He gave me children to mother and a purpose beyond just surviving. He gave me a real marriage, the kind I didn't even know existed. Do you love him? With everything in me, Emily said, tears streaming down her face. He's my husband, my partner, my home, and I love him more than I thought it was possible to love another person. And Thomas Parker, what do you feel for him? Emily looked at Thomas, at this man who'd caused her so much pain. Nothing. He's a stranger to me now, a stranger who once hurt me badly and now wants to hurt me again. I don't love him. I don't want to be near him, and the thought of being forced to return to him fills me with genuine fear. Peterson stood for cross-examination, trying to shake her testimony, but Emily remained firm. Yes, she'd married Thomas legally. Yes, she'd known that marriage hadn't been dissolved when she married James. But she'd believed, had been told by the circuit preacher, that abandonment constituted grounds for a new marriage. She'd acted in good faith, believing she was free. When it was over, when both sides had rested their cases, Judge Morrison called for closing arguments. Peterson went first, reiterating that the law was clear, that Emily Parker belonged to Thomas Parker regardless of personal feelings or circumstances. Then Blake stood for his final statement. Your Honor, the law exists to serve justice, not to perpetrate cruelty. Yes, Thomas Parker has a legal claim to Emily, but should that claim be honored when it would destroy a family, traumatize 3 children, and force a woman into a life with a man she fears? Should we prioritize a piece of paper over the lived reality of 4 people who love each other, who've built a life together, who are a family in every meaningful sense? He paused, letting his words sink in. Emily Calder made a choice when she married James Calder. She chose life over death, hope over despair, love over loneliness. That choice has created something beautiful, a family, a home, a future. To tear that apart now in service to a legal technicality would be a mockery of everything justice should stand for. Blake's voice grew passionate. Thomas Parker abandoned his wife. He left her to die in the desert, and when she survived, when she built a better life without him, He decided he wanted her back, not out of love, but out of greed and vindictiveness. This court has the power to say no, to say that abandonment has consequences, that actions matter more than documents, that choosing to love and care for someone makes you more of a spouse than any marriage certificate ever could. He turned to look at the gallery, at the packed courtroom. Everyone in this room knows what real family looks like. It looks like James Calder delivering a baby that isn't his by blood, but is his in every other way. It looks like children who call a woman mama because she's earned that title through love and sacrifice. It looks like a man and woman who chose each other twice, once out of necessity and once out of love, and who have built something worth protecting. Blake turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I'm not asking you to break the law. I'm asking you to interpret it with wisdom, to recognize that Emily Calder is not the legal property of Thomas Parker to be reclaimed at will. She's a human being, a mother, a wife who has rights and dignity and a life worth preserving. I'm asking you to look at this family and see what I see. Love that deserves protection, not destruction. The courtroom was silent as Blake sat down. Judge Morrison looked at Emily, then at James, then at young David sitting beside his father with fear written across his face. Finally, the judge looked at Thomas, taking in his expensive clothes, his smug expression, his complete lack of concern for the devastation he was causing. I'll render my decision tomorrow morning, Judge Morrison said, and brought his gavel down with a crack that sounded like doom. That night, Emily lay in her cell, unable to sleep. Marshal Hawkins had allowed James to stay past the usual hours, and he sat beside her cell, their hands clasped through the bars. Whatever happens, James said, I meant what I told you. I'll never stop fighting to get you back. I know, Emily whispered. But James, if the judge rules against us, you have to promise me you'll take care of yourself, that you'll be strong for the children. They'll need you more than ever. I need you, James said, his voice breaking. We all do. Emily, I don't know how to do this without you. The same way you did before I came, Emily said, even though her heart was shattering. One day at a time, one moment at a time, you'll survive because you have to, for them. They sat like that through the long night, holding hands through iron bars, memorizing the feel of each other in case it was the last time. When dawn finally came, painting the sky with ribbons of pink and gold, Emily felt hollowed out, emptied of everything except a desperate, fragile hope. The courtroom was even more packed than the day before. Emily took her seat beside Blake, James directly behind her. She could feel his presence like a physical thing, an anchor in the storm. Judge Morrison entered, his face grave. He surveyed the courtroom, then began to speak. This has been one of the most difficult cases I've ever heard. The law is clear. Emily Parker's marriage to Thomas Parker was never legally dissolved, which would make her subsequent marriage to James Calder invalid. By strict legal interpretation, she should be returned to her legal husband. Emily felt James's hand on her shoulder, gripping tight. This was it. They'd lost. But the judge continued. However, the law also recognizes the concept of abandonment and its consequences. Thomas Parker's actions, leaving his pregnant wife with no resources in a hostile environment, explicitly telling her to forget him and start over, making no attempt to contact her or provide for her, constitute clear and deliberate abandonment. Emily's breath caught. Was there hope after all? Furthermore, Judge Morrison said, his voice growing stronger, I must consider the welfare of the children involved. 3 innocent children have built lives around Emily Calder as their mother. To remove her would cause them demonstrable harm. The law must serve justice, and there is no justice in destroying a family to satisfy the greed of a man who forfeited his rights through his own actions. Thomas half rose from his seat. Your Honor, you can't— Sit down, Mr. Parker, the judge said sharply. I'm not finished. Thomas sat, his face mottled with rage. After careful consideration of the testimony and evidence, I find that Thomas Parker's abandonment of Emily Parker constituted a de facto dissolution of their marriage. While not a legal divorce, his actions demonstrated clear intent to end the relationship and forfeiture of marital rights. Therefore, I rule that Emily Calder's marriage to James Calder is valid and should be upheld. The courtroom erupted. Emily couldn't breathe, couldn't think. could only feel James's arms coming around her from behind, his face pressed against her hair, his tears mixing with hers. Judge Morrison banged his gavel for order. Furthermore, I find that Hope Calder is the legal daughter of James Calder, having been born within his marriage to Emily Calder and claimed by him as his own. Thomas Parker has no legal rights or claim to the child. "This is outrageous," Thomas shouted, lunging to his feet. "You can't do this. The law." "The law," Judge Morrison said coldly, "is what I say it is in this courtroom. And I say that you abandoned your wife and any rights you had to her. You will have no further contact with Mrs. Emily Calder or her family. If you attempt to approach her or harass her in any way, you will be arrested and charged. Do I make myself clear?" Thomas's face was purple with fury, but he could only nod. "This hearing is concluded," the judge said, bringing down his gavel one final time. "Mrs. Calder, you're free to go home with your husband." Emily turned in James's arms, and they clung to each other, both sobbing with relief and joy and overwhelming gratitude. Around them, the courtroom celebrated, people cheering, Mrs. Henderson dabbing at her eyes, even Marshal Hawkins smiling broadly. David pushed through the crowd to reach them, and Emily pulled him into their embrace. "We won," the boy said, his voice thick with tears. "Mama, you get to come home." "I'm coming home," Emily confirmed, kissing his forehead. "I'm never leaving you again." Blake approached, his usual composure cracked by a wide smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Calder. You're legally and irrevocably married to this man." "Thank you," Emily said, grasping his hand. "Thank you for fighting for us." "It was an honor," Blake said. "Now go home to your family, all of them." The ride back to the ranch felt like a dream. Emily sat in front of James on his horse, his arms around her, their hands clasped over her belly. David rode alongside them, chattering excitedly about everything that had happened in the week she'd been gone. As the ranch came into view, Emily saw Lila burst from the house, Hope in her arms, running toward them with the reckless abandon only a 5-year-old could manage. "Mama! Mama's home!" James helped Emily down, and she knelt to embrace Lila, carefully taking Hope into her arms. The baby looked at her for a long moment, as if verifying it was really her mother, then broke into a gummy smile that made Emily's heart overflow. "We're all together again," Lila said, wrapping her arms around Emily's neck. "We're all together, and nobody can take you away." "Nobody," Emily agreed, standing with Hope in her arms, James's hand on her waist. David and Lila pressed close. "We're a family, now and forever." That night, after the children were in bed, after Hope had been fed and rocked to sleep, Emily found herself in the bedroom she now shared with James. He'd moved her things while she was gone, unable to bear the thought of her small room standing empty. He came in to find her standing by the window, looking out at the stars, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find it was all a dream," Emily said softly. "That I'm still in that cell, still waiting to be taken away." "You're home," James said firmly. "You're mine, legally and irrevocably. The judge said so, the law says so, and more importantly, my heart says so." Emily turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd saved her in every way possible. "I love you, James Calder. I love you for finding me, for offering me hope, for fighting for me. I love you for being a father to Hope, for loving my daughter as your own. I love you for being exactly who you are, steady and honorable and so very good." "I love you, Emily Calder," James said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you for bringing my family back to life, for giving David and Lila a mother who chose them, for being my partner, my wife, my heart. I loved you when you were a stranger at a stagecoach stop, and I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." He kissed her then, deep and tender and full of promise. And as Emily melted into her husband's embrace, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She'd been abandoned, broken, left for dead in the desert, but that abandonment had led her to this, to love, to family, to a home, and a future she'd never dared to dream of. Thomas Parker had meant to destroy her by leaving her at that stagecoach stop. Instead, he'd set her free. Free to find real love, real partnership, real family. Free to discover that the heart could heal and grow and become stronger in the broken places. As James carried her to their bed as they came together in love and passion and the complete union of husband and wife, Emily sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances and unexpected blessings, for a cowboy with sad eyes who'd said his children needed love and had ended up giving so much more, for the family she'd found when she'd lost everything else. She'd been abandoned at a stagecoach stop, pregnant and desperate and alone. But that abandonment had been the beginning, not the end. It had led her exactly where she needed to be, to the people who needed her as much as she needed them. In the morning, Emily woke to the sound of children's laughter and Hope's happy babbling. She slipped from bed, leaving James sleeping peacefully, and made her way to the kitchen where David was attempting to make pancakes for his sisters. "Let me help with that," Emily said, kissing the top of his head. David looked up at her with a smile that held no more shadows. "I'm glad you're home, Mama." "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." As Emily stood at the stove, David beside her learning to flip pancakes, Lila setting the table with exaggerated care, Hope cooing in her cradle, and James emerging sleepy-eyed and smiling to join them, Emily knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. This was her family. This was her home. This was the life she'd been meant to live all along. The cowboy at the stagecoach stop had said his children needed love, but what he'd really offered was so much more than that. He'd offered Emily herself back, whole, healed, and stronger than she'd ever been. He'd offered her a future built on love and choice and the unbreakable bonds of family. And Emily Calder, who'd once been Emily Parker, who'd been abandoned and rescued and transformed, looked around her kitchen at the family gathered there and knew that sometimes the worst moments of your life led directly to the best. That betrayal could have become blessing, that endings could be beginnings, that being left behind could mean being found. She'd been abandoned at a stagecoach stop, but in that abandonment, she'd discovered something precious beyond measure. She'd discovered home, and she would never be lost again.